Chapter 1248. Zoe stood on the railing of the bridge, looking down at the noisy crowd on the deck. The Roland was not large, and it had to be forced to accommodate nearly 1,000 people. As a result, every empty seat was occupied, leaving no space for them to sit down. Moreover, it was the first time for most of the refugees to go to sea, and the bumpy sea conditions soon made them feel uncomfortable. Dizziness and vomiting were everywhere, and the dense crowd aggravated the reaction. Even those who were physically fit could not stand it for a long time when they were vomited all over their faces. She could not help but feel lucky that the god's punishment body could not smell. Mortals are so fragile. Carol's voice suddenly came from behind. I can't believe we used to do this. Indeed. Zoe nodded sympathetically. She naturally knew what Carol was referring to. When the captain received the request for help, he immediately went to find them. Since the main task of the Roland was to determine the general location of the god's stone mine, Zoe had the final say in all the operations. At that time, the ship carried the magic core of the underground civilization, so they should try their best to avoid any accidents. Moreover, the huge core skeleton almost occupied the entire rear deck, and even if they went there, they would not be able to transport many people. Faced with such a request, she should have flatly refused. In the era of the Union, the magic core was extremely limited, and it could not be replicated, so it was not comparable to the magic core of mortals at all. Not to mention the refugees, even if she had to choose between a town and the core instrument, she would not hesitate at all. But now, she was hesitant. After discussing with her companions for a while, Zoe made a decision that even she herself found unbelievable. She unloaded the magic core in another port town, entrusted the local First Army to guard it, and returned to the northernmost port with the Roland. She even told the garrison that if the ship did not return on time, they must send the instrument back to Neverwinter. But it doesn't feel bad, Carol shrugged with a smile. To be honest, I feel rather conflicted when I think that you might reject me. I hope they can live up to His Majesty's expectations, Zoe deliberately said with a cold face. What gradually changed the minds of his companions? Many scenes appeared in her mind, the First Army fighting against the demons in the ruins of the Holy City, the nurses taking care of her in the hospital, the ordinary people in the dream world who were no different from witches, and Roland Wimbledon. Yeah, we didn't take such a huge risk to return to the Red Mist area in vain. Carol patted her on the shoulder and turned to walk toward the bridge. In any case, this mission has been successfully completed. I really want to go back to Neverwinter as soon as possible. Whenever I think of the Sichuan-style hotpot in the dream world, I'm drooling. Gulp. Zoe could not help but gulp. Fortunately, Carol had already closed the door to the tunnel, so she did not hear this soft sound. She cast aside her distracting thoughts and looked at the red mist in the distance. More than 400 years ago, the Battle of Divine Will, which had brought endless nightmares to the Union, was finally coming again. Although it was much earlier than expected and the strength of the demons had undergone tremendous changes, she was calmer than she had expected. This time, they were no longer fighting alone. Haxord was floating above a city that had just been occupied. There was no billowing smoke, nor was there a bloody battlefield. Most of the buildings were in good condition, and it did not look like a place that had just experienced a dangerous siege. The resistance of the humans was negligible, even worse than 400 years ago. If not for its trust in Osrook, it would have thought that the ones occupying the southwest of this continent were not humans, but the Sky-Sea realm. In just a short week, the demon army had expanded the battlefront to a distance of hundreds of miles, and established outposts in places that were not yet covered by the life floaters. This process could not be completed so quickly without the help of the humans. According to the reports from his subordinates, the demons had only slightly threatened the lords and nobles, such as chopping off a few hundred people's heads, but the other side was already scared out of their wits and began to transport resources to the demon army. This situation was exactly the same as the first battle of Divine Will. It seemed that the news of the first city it conquered, the Snow Reflection Castle, and setting it on fire had already spread. The other side undoubtedly understood the consequences of going against the demon army. With the expansion of the offensive, Haxord gradually obtained a lot of information from the humans. It did not understand why the demon army, which had already united as a whole during the Union's era, had now become a pile of loose sand. A mere corner of the continent had actually been divided into 4 kingdoms, and their orders were not interlinked. The Union that had once ruled over the human army had also disappeared. What had they spent their time on in the past 400 years? It did not seem to be the case for a kingdom that lacked power. After all, even its most valued genius general had fallen in the hands of the humans. Did the other side not understand the power of unity? But regardless, Haxord's heart that had been hanging in suspense was finally at ease. Although there were many accidents in the Western Front offensive, it was still successfully carried out according to plan. The birth tower had now been successfully activated, and it had not let down the king's trust. At least, compared to Blood, who only had a loud voice, and Mask, whose words could not be trusted, it had at least fulfilled its promise. After passing through a series of distortion doors, Haxord returned to the collapse of the cracked Ridge Mountains. As a stronghold to annex the last piece of the puzzle in the Land of Dawn, it had already decided to name this city Sky. Just like its own title, this city would definitely be remembered by the demon army. Almost at the same time, the adjutant also sent reports of the advancement in other directions. The Sky Lord quickly read through the reports submitted by the various divisions, and a detail caught his attention. There was a large number of refugees fleeing everywhere in the Kingdom of Everwinter. If that was all, it would not be surprising. After all, most of the refugees would die on the way even if they were left alone. And this kind of fleeing seemed to be organized and premeditated. They were all heading south towards the Kingdom of Wolfheart, and they were advancing on land and water simultaneously. Not only did the troops that wanted to stop them fail to stop them, but they were also fiercely counterattacked. Their behavior was very similar to that of the enemies that Osruk had mentioned. Even though a few troops led by Ascendants had achieved victory, they still lacked the manpower to completely stop them. This was also the disadvantage of choosing to erect the birth tower on a high mountain. Without the assistance of the distortion door, the primal demons and junior demons would not be able to rely on their own strength to trek into the human territory. He could not help but frown. Where's the Nightmare Lord? The Nightmare Lord is still immersed in the floating pool and has not shown any signs of waking up. Damn it, it's almost been more than 10 days. Did this guy go too deep and get swallowed by the realm of mind? Haxord summoned a distortion door and stepped into the lowest level of the Rift Valley. Valkyries maintained her initial silent posture as she sat cross-legged in the shimmering water. Her expression was natural, without any signs of struggle when she was being devoured. Other than the fact that she had been connected for a long time, there was nothing out of the ordinary. This meant that it was still conscious and was swimming in the sea of consciousness. If the other party was a blood conqueror, the Sky Lord would have long slapped him. Forcibly leaving the realm of mind would damage his memory, which was not important to the former. But for the Nightmare Lord, he did not dare to be so rash. Of all times to be immersed in it, it just had to be now. The human's retreat was too deliberate, which made him feel that something was wrong. However, he could not explain this to the king. After all, there were already 2 Grand Lords on the Western Front, and it was unlikely that they would send another Grand Lord to chase after those lowly mortals. If he were to say this to the Holy See, he would be ridiculed. However, in reality, he had already done his best to send troops, while the other Grand Lord only acted according to his own thoughts and was of no help to the situation. It was equivalent to the Western Front not having a single usable Grand Lord, which greatly weakened the long-distance pursuit of the troops. If the Nightmare Lord could help him eliminate those escapees, he would not be in such an awkward situation. After glaring at the Nightmare Lord for a while, Haxord had no choice but to leave the Red Mist Pond. Chapter 1249. In the Kingdom of Wolfheart, at the Sedimentation Bay. White drove a carriage of people into the bustling port area. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to arrive at our destination. No matter what you've been through in the past, I'm sure you'll have a new life waiting for you. I wish you all a smooth journey in advance, and I'd like to offer you one last convenient service. White shouted enthusiastically as he pulled the reins to slow down his horse. He had been living a good life recently. Ever since the arrival of the Grey Castle fleet, the sedimentation bay suddenly boomed, especially in the short-distance transportation industry. He could earn about 10 silver royals by transporting people from the surrounding towns to the port. He could do this job at least twice a day, and if he was not worried about the damage of the carriage, he could even transport another batch of people at night. His income was almost as high as when he had worked for the church. What was even more amazing was that the reward was not collected from the people on the train, but from the people of Grey Castle. As long as they stamped a piece of paper with the stamp of both places, they would receive the reward according to the number of people they killed after passing through the checkpoint. The reward would be paid immediately without delay. Because of this, transportation became a popular industry. Many sailors and handymen joined in. Even if they did not know how to drive a carriage, they could still find someone to work for them. They did not need to pick their passengers, and when they arrived at the destination, they could just pick a full carriage and set off. The only thing they had to consider was which town to transport people to. After all, the distance was related to the cost. Obviously, Grey Castle wanted to treat everyone equally. As long as they were willing to leave the kingdom of Wolfheart, they would help them regardless of whether they had money or not. However, the king of Grey Castle was wealthy and could afford to do whatever he wanted. White did not want to let go of this hard-earned opportunity. After all, he would be a fool not to make money. Moreover, he had already heard that something had happened in the north. The number of refugees pouring into the kingdom of Wolfheart from the border was increasing rapidly. Those rumors were not groundless. He also heard from Smarty that the lord of the sedimentation bay, Baron Jean Bate, had secretly transported a lot of things from his mansion onto the ship. If even Baron had to avoid risks, White naturally had to make preparations in advance. If he could make more money now, he would have more leeway in the future. What kind of convenient service? Someone asked. Some useful experiences and reminders. White pointed to the harbor where large ships were gathered. Look over there. Although everyone wants to go to Grey Castle, the journey is not the same. I was in the sedimentation bay before they came here, so I've heard some things. Maybe I can be of some help to you in the future. Then, please tell us. Of course, the prerequisite is that you have to spend a small sum of money. Not much, just 1 silver royal will do. White knew that those penniless people didn't care about their future. As long as they had food to eat, it didn't make much difference whether they asked or not. Therefore, from the beginning, his target was the refugees who had some savings. They were always particularly interested in this kind of side benefit. Plus, the price was not high, and they did not have to pay a dime for the carriage, so they were not too resistant to buying information. Because he was once such a person. Ha, a trick of a mouse. A well-dressed man sneered, unfortunately, he's not even as courageous as a mouse. Give him a silver royal. Soon, someone beside him handed him the money. He actually brought an entourage. Looks like he's a noble. White smiled fawningly, but he didn't think much of it. How could a noble be so poor that he didn't even have a carriage and had to squeeze into a carriage with a commoner? This is my share. The other young man hesitated for a moment before he took out a silver royal from his pocket. Only 2 people are willing to pay. Van Era stopped the carriage and waited for a while. Seeing that no one else said anything, he decided to open the door and let the guests go. In any case, it was better than nothing. It was not a bad thing to have 2 more people on this trip. At this time, the young man said to the others, "Don't get separated. I'll tell you when I get the information. It's free." Boy, what did you say? White's face froze. I paid, the young man said confidently. It's one thing for you to tell me, but it's another thing for me to tell others. Is there anything wrong with that? You may want to go back on your word, but it won't do you any good. Even if I turn around and let all the people in the port know, it won't affect the people you're transporting. And if you don't get a silver royal, you'll suffer a real loss. What a sharp-tongued guy. White opened his mouth, but found that he did not know how to refute. Idiot, it's your freedom to do this. Can't you just keep it to yourself? The nobleman said unhappily, you have to waste each other's time. This is not a mistake. Why should I hide it? The young man said bluntly, I think it's the fairest way to let the coachman know. Fairest? The nobleman glanced at him as if he was looking at an idiot, and then turned his head disdainfully to look at White. Hey, I don't care about this guy. I've already paid. Are you going to tell me or not? White glared at the young man and had to admit that the young man was right. Okay, I'll be generous this time. Really? Don't get off the carriage. You can stay here and listen to me. Then he roughly told them what he had heard, such as which people Greycastle favored, the arrangements for evacuating by ship, the things to pay attention to when queuing up and registering, and the second inspection after arriving at the destination. Especially the point of comparison, as long as the people in front entered the port, they would naturally notice the speech of the First Army's guide, and he just summarized a few key points. But the latter was the valuable information he had obtained from chatting with the soldiers. According to the people of Greycastle, witches would participate in the inspection, and any lies would be exposed. Once the registered identity did not match the reality, they would be labeled as dishonest, and it would be much more difficult for them to find a decent job. In addition, the identity of a noble not only did not help to improve their treatment, but it would also annoy people if they kept talking about it, so it was best to just say one sentence. As long as they could read and write, or had a skill, they basically did not have to worry about their future. Thank you for your reminder. When they got off the carriage, the young man was the last to leave. It really saves us a lot of detours. You're welcome. Anyway, you bought it with money. White angrily lit his pipe and took a deep breath. As for those people, they should be thanking you, but they all scattered as soon as they got off the carriage. Boy, don't always think of yourself as a good person, especially outside. Otherwise, sooner or later, you'll suffer a lot. He himself was the same. What he got in return was nothing but a cold, fake leg. Maybe, but this is the duty of a knight. Do you think I haven't seen a knight? Or are you referring to the descriptions in the ancient books? Come on, the last time I heard of it was from the mouth of a mouse in a tavern. Everyone is like this, but it doesn't mean it's right. Oh. Seeing that he was so serious, White raised his eyebrows. You're a knight. No, I haven't been conferred a title. My father is, but he's already. So that's how it is. Another hothead with empty dreams, and it seems that he's even worse off than the previous guy. He waved his hand. I'm not interested in your family background. By the way. What's your name? The young man immediately raised his head. Manfeld Castian. Chapter 1250. After the carriage left, Manfeld found that, just as the coachman had said, no one stayed behind to wait for him. Everyone had left, and the crowd around him was full of unfamiliar faces. However, he did not feel too depressed. He did not do those things for the sake of gratitude, but because he thought it was the right thing to do. Based on the information provided by the coachman, Manfeld soon found the registration office of the Greycastle people. In fact, the area was not only full of banners, but also full of people shouting. It was hard not to notice. Despite the large number of people, the order of the scene did not appear chaotic. Iron railings divided the crowd into several folded groups. It seemed that the distance from the entrance to the registration desk had been artificially extended, but this also meant that people could only move forward one by one according to the path defined by the railings. When it was Manfeld's turn, a Greycastle man dressed like a soldier received him. These outsiders were all wearing the same uniform, so it was easy to recognize them. Name? Manfeld Castian. Identity? Did you commit any crimes? What's your specialty? Just like what the coachman had said, Manfeld answered all the questions truthfully and skipped over his family background. When he was about to elaborate on his specialties, the soldier interrupted him after hearing that he could read and write. That's enough. Get on the boat at pier number 6. This is your registration number plate. Don't lose it. Next. Before Manfeld realized what had happened, he was squeezed out of the queue and entered the dock area. Ah. That's it? Is it really like what the coachman said? Can one live a comfortable life in Greycastle just because he can read and write? But judging from the situation at the registration desk, it seems that any Greycastle man can read and write. While waiting in line, Manfeld noticed that the scribes had changed several times. Sometimes, they even found a temporary soldier to supervise the order, but nothing went wrong. This situation puzzled him a little. Moreover, the plate given to him by the Greycastle man seemed to contain some secret. It was an iron plate with a hemp rope hanging on one end, which could be worn as a necklace. There were a series of symbols engraved on the plate, which were probably related to his registration number. It wouldn't cost much to hire a blacksmith to make such a small metal plate, but it would be a completely different story if it were to be used by the entire group of migrants. Castian's family had a blacksmith shop in the past, so he knew what that meant. A piece of iron plate could be made from the scraps left over from forging, but 100 pieces or 1,000 pieces could not be made. Engraving the symbol would take half a day, but repeating it 100 or 1,000 times would take a long time. However, there were more than 1,000 people on the pier. If the sedimentation bay was like this every day, it would be an understatement to say that there were tens of thousands of them. And to prepare a registration card like this for all the migrants? The materials and time required were far beyond his imagination. Even if he gathered all the blacksmiths in the kingdom of Wolfheart, it would still be impossible. This alone made him realize the wealth and luxury of the kingdom of Greycastle. In the past, this title belonged to the Kingdom of Dawn. With these thoughts in mind, Manfeld boarded a 3-masted ship. He didn't know if it was because of his specialty, but he was assigned to a cabin for 10 people. It was much better than he had expected to sleep in the cargo hold. Even so, he could not stand the pungent smell in the cabin. No matter how poor his family was, they could at least provide him with a comfortable bedroom. Therefore, he only stayed for a short while before he escaped in a panic. When he was about to go to the deck to get some fresh air, he suddenly heard a soft cry for help. It seemed to come from the end of the corridor. At this time, there were not many people boarding the ship. The sailors were busy on the upper deck, so the cabin was somewhat empty. Except for Manfeld, no one else had heard the cry for help. Without hesitation, Manfeld walked toward the source of the cry. At the end of the corridor was a storeroom. Except for the crew, few people would come to such a place. He gently pressed his ear against the door, and sure enough, he heard some strange noises, as if someone was struggling. He decisively took 2 steps back, lowered his shoulders, and slammed open the door. Manfeld was taken aback by what he saw. The man standing in the storeroom was the middle-aged nobleman who had been on the carriage with him and mocked him for his stupidity. 2 of his attendants were pressing 2 women to the ground and trying to tie their hands and feet with ropes. The women's mouths were stuffed with a piece of linen cloth, and they could only mumble in a low voice. Apparently, they were brought here by force. "Oh. Aren't you a fool who pretends to be fair?" the nobleman said calmly. "If I'm not mistaken, you're also a noble, right? My name is Mac McKinley. What about you?" "Manfeld Castian." This was the 3rd time that Manfeld had said his name in a day. He noticed that the moment he revealed his identity, the woman's eyes, which had just lit up with hope, suddenly dimmed, and even her struggle became much weaker. "Castian? I've never heard of him." The man shrugged. "But you're lucky. Since you've met me, I'll let you have some fun. But you'll have to wait after me." "Let them go," Manfeld said in a low voice. "Huh?" Mac McKinley narrowed his eyes. "Is there something wrong with you? Do you know who they are?" "Slaves. And they've been played by countless people. At first, I thought I was mistaken. I didn't expect to meet these 2 little things on the ship. As far as I know, their owner would never let them go. So, it's simple. They escaped without permission. Even so, you still want to protect them? Even among the slaves, escaped slaves were the lowest kind, almost no different from livestock. No matter what the nobleman did to them, they would not be blamed. But it was just as he had said before. Everyone is like this, but it doesn't mean it's right. The destination of this ship is Grey Castle, right? What are you trying to say? Mac McKinley said with a gloomy face. You must have heard the propaganda of Grey Castle. The royal family of Wimbledon has abolished slavery. So, from the moment they boarded this ship, they were no longer slaves, Manfeld said. And don't forget, after we disembark, there will be a round of investigation, which includes criminal records. If I tell them, do you think the people of Grey Castle will pretend nothing happened? What if I insist? The man asked through clenched teeth. Then beat me first, Manfeld said, rolling up his sleeves. I'm a knight. Before he could finish, Mac McKinley's men had already pounced on him. The outcome of the battle was quickly decided. Apparently, the man's guards were well trained. In the narrow storeroom, Manfeld lost the ability to fight back in less than 10 moves. When he fell to the ground with a swollen face, Mac McKinley came up and gave him a couple of kicks. You want to act cool with your skills? I thought you were as good as your mouth, the middle-aged nobleman spat on the ground. Damn it. You ruined my mood. Since you like to protect these two bitches, I'll let you have them. But don't forget, slaves are slaves. It's the same no matter where they go. It's so unlucky to meet such an idiot. Let's go. Chapter 1251. It took Manfeld quite a while to recover from the dizziness. His vision was blurry, and his face was burning. It was difficult for him to open his eyes. Damn it. Didn't they say that nobles should not hit their faces in a fight? With great effort, he slowly sat up from the ground and slowly moved toward the two terrified women. He pulled out the rags from their mouths. Don't be afraid. I'll untie you after I catch my breath. The two women did not even dare to breathe heavily. They only nodded slightly. This time, he paused for a longer time before he gathered enough strength to loosen the ropes. Okay, you can go now. Just be careful not to be caught by that guy again. That guy should not have a chance. When the ship left the port with a full load of people, he would run into migrants everywhere he went. That guy probably did not have the guts to do this in front of everyone. The two women carefully walked around him and quickly ran out of the storeroom. Their hurried footsteps gradually faded away, and finally, silence. From the beginning to the end, they still did not say a word, not even a word of thanks. Manfeld leaned against the wall and let out a sigh. For some reason, the words of the coachman suddenly came to his mind. Boy, don't always think of yourself as a good guy, especially when you're outside. Otherwise, sooner or later, you'll suffer a lot. He shook his head and threw these distracting thoughts to the back of his mind. He was already used to this kind of situation, wasn't he? Now, he only hoped that he could return to his assigned cabin before the official departure, so that his bed would not be occupied. Suddenly, Manfeld heard footsteps again, accompanied by the creaking of the wooden planks. The footsteps were approaching him. Damn it, don't tell me that Mike McKinley hasn't had enough. The footsteps stopped at the door of the storeroom. Then, the door was pushed open a little, and a head poked in. Manfeld was stunned. It was one of the women who had escaped. When the door opened, he found that both of them were there. The one standing in the back was carrying a wooden bucket with difficulty. Her movements were so stiff that it seemed that she had exerted all her strength. It was not until she placed the bucket in front of him that he noticed that it was filled with water. One of them took out a handkerchief and wiped the blood on his face. The other one kept apologizing. I'm so sorry that you were beaten up like this. We were so scared that we didn't dare to say a word. Because, you said you were also a noble. Manfeld could not help laughing. Even though his body was stinging, he did not want to control his expression. What's wrong, didn't I tell you? From the moment we boarded the ship, there was no longer any difference between slaves and nobles. Because the king of Grey Castle not only abolished the slave status, but also took back all the nobles' rights. In other words, we are the same people. Indeed, Manfeld knew that there were no more knights in the kingdom of Grey Castle. Merchants from all over the kingdom of Wolfheart had already spread the news to the kingdom of Wolfheart. In the eyes of most nobles, this was an act of treason, which made him pay more attention to Wimbledon. Ever since his family fell behind, a question had been lingering in his mind. What exactly was a knight? When his father was still alive, he had never considered this question. He had thought that it was only a matter of time before he inherited the title of knight. However, when his territory was annexed by various factions, Manfeld found that things had changed beyond his expectations. The new lord turned a blind eye to him, and those who were obviously not qualified to be his lord became superior. Other than his surname, he seemed to have nothing. According to the ancient books, the ancestors of the pioneers chose the most outstanding representative to be the king. The king would then grant the most outstanding representative a position and honor to protect the homeland and the people. This was the origin of the title of nobility. As the person closest to the bottom of society, the knight should be humble and compassionate. At the same time, he should uphold justice and integrity. Only in this way could his territory prosper. It was because of these qualities that ordinary people did not have that they were more noble. This was also what Manfeld had always wanted to be. However, he did not understand how a knight was different from an ordinary person without a land. Was it those extraordinary spirits that represented their loftiness, or was it a title deed? In the struggle for power and interests, the territories of the lords changed every day. Among the people he knew, a lame person could be a knight, and an idiot could be a knight. However, Manfeld, who did not have a land, could not be a knight. This made him suspicious of the so-called knight class. Although his family had suffered many setbacks since its decline, Manfeld's goal had never changed. He had long wanted to go to Grey Castle, but he lacked the travel money. Later, when the people of Grey Castle took the initiative to enter the kingdom of Wolfheart, he found a good opportunity to go to Grey Castle. He wanted to know if it was possible to become a knight in a place where nobles no longer existed. Hearing the words, "we're the same," the two women were visibly relieved. Is that true? It's been known among the nobles for months. Those big families all want to say that Wimbledon is the devil from hell, Manfeld said with a forced smile. Manfeld forced a smile. But now, I'm afraid they're all going to seek refuge with the most dreadful demon. The one who wiped his face fell silent for a moment and asked, "Why do you want to help us? Aren't you afraid that the noble? He won't dare to kill us, because I've already warned him." Manfeld shook his head. "I don't know how the people of Grey Castle will investigate the case, but I heard that witches are involved, so it's impossible for them to lie. Even if he doesn't think it's a crime to humiliate you, killing another noble is a crime that he can't ignore. He knows it." He paused for a moment and said, "By the way, I'm Manfeld Castian. What about you?" This was the fourth time that he had told them his name today. "I'm Dylane," the one said in a low voice. "She's Momo." She paused for a moment as if she was making up her mind. What the noble said was true. "We were sold to, as I said, that was before we boarded the ship. It's okay if you don't mention it." Manfeld waved his hand. "Just like the coachman said, no matter how we used to live, we'll have a new life in the future. Otherwise, we wouldn't have left the kingdom of Wolfheart for a strange place, would we?" Woo! At this moment, the long and deep sound of a bugle horn rang out. It was almost time to set sail. "Let's go back. We'll be in trouble if someone else takes our place." He struggled to stand up. Although his body was still aching, he could still walk back to his cabin. "Me too. I don't want to sleep in the storeroom on such a long journey." The two women exchanged a look. After a moment of hesitation, Dylane took out a white pill from her pocket and handed it to him. It's a medicine that can slow down pain," Dylane said. "If you can't bear the pain anymore, lick it or take a small piece. But don't take too much at once, because it can only delay the pain, but can't eliminate it. Manfeld took the pill with a puzzled look. It could only delay pain instead of stop it. Was there such a miraculous medicine in this world? Without further explanation, Thylane and Momo left the storeroom with the buckets. This time, the two of them stopped at the door and bowed deeply to him. "Thank you, Mr. Castian." Manfeld heaved a sigh of relief. Not everyone was the same, was it? That was enough. He looked at the pill in his hand for a while and tried to lick it. A faint sweetness spread from the tip of his tongue. Was this a ball made of wheat flour? Or maybe it was a little honey. Perhaps it was just a placebo stolen from the nobleman who bought her. However, the moment this thought popped up in his mind, something incredible happened. Chapter 1252. Grey Castle, City of Neverwinter. Within a week, the First Army continuously sent back intelligence that not only confirmed the appearance of the red mist in the north of Everwinter, but also gave Roland a general understanding of the evacuation situation. Just as Edith predicted, the demons did not wait for the red mist to completely disperse before invading the kingdom of Everwinter. They took advantage of the shortening of the supply line to attack the humans from multiple directions, and even clashed with the migrating troops of the First Army. Evidently, they had been waiting for this moment for a long time. According to the statistics obtained from Iron Axe, the outcome of the battle was not optimistic. In the process of evacuating the refugees, several units were suddenly defeated by the sudden attacks, and the retreat turned into a rout. The soldiers were also scattered by the panicked citizens. Currently, the confirmed number of casualties had exceeded 300, almost equivalent to the casualties of the night attack during the expedition to Tequila. Furthermore, the number of refugees exceeded 10,000, and it could be said to be a heavy loss. The swift movements of the enemy had clearly caught everyone off guard. Although it was more efficient to break up the advanced troops of the First Army to evacuate the population, it also reduced their combat ability. Fortunately, Roland had long ago instilled in the army the idea of preserving their strength as much as possible, and that the grassroots officers and soldiers who failed should not be punished. The defeated soldiers did not turn to become soldiers or bandits, and instead retreated into the kingdom of Wolfheart one after another, reconnecting with the garrison. Otherwise, according to the previous situation where the command system could no longer be called back, the army in the north of Everwinter would probably be completely wiped out. Not only could these escaped soldiers quickly form a new fighting force, but they also brought extremely important intelligence to the command center. For example, many units reported that they had discovered monstrous beasts that were not recorded in the manual during the battle. A unit that successfully evacuated from the northernmost port of Everwinter mentioned that the demons had used a new type of spider-like monstrous beast during the attack. Its defensive ability was much stronger than the previous two types. Mortars and anti-demon grenades were unable to paralyze its movements, and only 152 mm long-song cannons could cause effective damage. As for the other types of monstrous beasts, there were only descriptions of their appearances, and their specific abilities were unknown. The war was undoubtedly speeding up the maturity of these monstrous beasts. With the support of the intelligence, several high-level meetings were held, and all the ministers agreed to send out the army to stop the enemy as soon as possible, so as to buy time for the evacuation of the two countries. After all, the population of Neverwinter was growing rapidly, and there were more and more workers, which gave the officials a taste of the benefits, except for the police department and the security bureau. Roland also thought so. Unfortunately, Greycastle's transport capacity had reached its limit. He wanted to send tens of thousands of people to the kingdom of Wolfheart in one go, but it would be useless if his ammunition and equipment could not keep up. Therefore, even though the order had been issued, it was still a long process to assemble the troops. This was different from the Tequila expedition. The Tequila expedition had been following the railway from the beginning, and no matter where they went, they had to rely on the Black River train and leaf to supply them. Now, before the new transportation equipment was deployed, the general staff had to think of other ways. There was another point in the report that caught his attention. The squad that had successfully evacuated previously was only able to escape unscathed because of the support of the shallow water gunboat. The reason why the Roland could arrive in time was because Zoe and Carol had temporarily abandoned their priceless magic power core for the sake of ordinary people. This change in perspective made Roland realize that the ancient witches might be able to make the relics of the underground civilization play a greater role. He directly went to the 3 senior witches of Tequila. Through the light screen, Pasha, Alethea, and Celine's tentacle-covered bodies appeared on the wall of the office. Roland briefly stated his idea. "You mean, to use the instrument of divine retribution as an ability converter?" Celine was the first one to speak. "Not just the instrument of divine retribution, but all the magic power cores." Roland nodded. "In theory, as long as the cyclone structure of the core was adjusted, it could imitate the abilities of most witches." There were a total of 4 Tequila artifacts excavated from the ruins, and the largest one was the most special. Its core cyclone was extremely complicated. According to the deciphered records, it was also a secret weapon that the underground civilization had high hopes for. The ancient witches named it the Instrument of Divine Retribution. However, only the so-called Chosen One could activate the Instrument of Divine Retribution, and the only one who seemed qualified, Roland, did not have magic power. Therefore, it had been placed in the underground hall and did nothing. If the core could be changed into other more useful abilities, it would obviously be better than leaving it to collect dust. The only problem was that the magic cores could not be replicated. Losing one meant losing one. For the surviving ancient witches, the magic cores were the direct cause of the division between Tequila and Starfall City. Many members of the Union had sacrificed their lives for them. The significance of this was self-evident. As early as the beginning of the alliance, Roland had promised that he would not force them to hand over the magic power cores. Even now that the Tequila witches had sworn their loyalty to him, he still intended to obtain their unanimous consent through negotiation. Alethea was a little hesitant. "If it were in the 3rd border city, Your Majesty, you could use it however you want. But if it is transported outside the cave, what if it is damaged?" Even Alethea, who was usually the toughest, did not immediately object, which made Roland feel that there was a chance. He struck while the iron was hot and said, "Strict protection and supervision are necessary measures. The damage from outsiders can basically be eliminated, but the wear and tear caused by the large number of uses is inevitable, but it's better than leaving it empty and useless now." Alethea looked at Celine. "How long will it take to transform the Instrument of Divine Retribution into another instrument and then back?" "I think, about a few decades," Celine estimated. "After all, its core cyclone is too complicated. If we add the wear and tear, it is very likely that it will never be able to transform back to the form of divine retribution." "But I still agree with Your Majesty, but that kind of magic power core can at least contribute to the defeat of the demons," Pasha echoed. "Now we don't need to find the Chosen One." Alethea was silent for a while. "Well, since you all agree, let's do it." For a moment, Roland seemed to see Celine pointing her main tentacle at him. "How is it? My persuasion is very effective, right?" Obviously, this was a private conversation. Before he could think of what to say, Celine's next words came to him. "Next time, let more witches from the Quest Society enter the dream world, Your Majesty." It seemed that this was also a kind of bribe. Roland did not know whether to laugh or cry. So, Celine pretended to be indifferent and said in a normal tone, although it was difficult to see any changes in their expressions and demeanor on the original carrier, "What kind of ability do you plan to transform the Instrument of Divine Retribution into?" He was already prepared for this question. Mystery Moon's magnetic power shouldn't be too complicated, right? Chapter 1253. The reason for choosing Mystery Moon was simple. Compared with the summoning ability, the enchantment ability was more suitable for the magic core. For example, Anna's Blackfire could not be controlled as freely as Anna could, even if she had the corresponding Cyclone core. The latter was not so troublesome. Roland only needed to inject magic power and activate the device. Among the two, the magnetization ability was the most beneficial to Neverwinter. Dawn Eye had always been a scarce resource. Even with the help of Doris, demonization, it could only be said to be barely enough. If the scale of the factory was to be expanded in the future, the power supply would immediately fall into a state of shortage. Moreover, power generation and transmission and transformation were extremely complicated and huge subjects. They were not inferior to mechanical majors at all. It was fine for him to use his middle school knowledge to make electric motors and light bulbs, but to build a reliable power grid was a little difficult for him. In fact, he had brought a lot of electricity textbooks from the dream world, but he found that he could not understand them at all. The content could even be summed up as, "I know every word, but I have no idea what they mean when they are put together." Instead of learning from the beginning, it was better to put his hope on the tequila witches. Perhaps in a decade or two, they would be able to shine in various industries, but now it was almost impossible for Neverwinter to make up for this. Therefore, it was particularly important to expand the production of Dawn Eye. As long as the factory had electricity, it could produce overnight, and as long as the residential area had electricity, people could work during the day and study at night. In a sense, the power system could also be regarded as a time device. Celine said that it was not technically difficult. The original carrier's perception of magic power was far superior to that of human beings. Ordinary witches could only determine the type and level of magic power of the person being observed with the stone of measuring, but in her mind, she could form the structure of the cyclone. As long as Mystery Moon used her ability a few times in front of her, she would be able to do it. However, when Roland informed Mystery Moon, the little girl expressed a rare hint of resistance. She pouted and said, "If a magic core can replace me, then will you not want me anymore?" Finally, under Roland's coaxing, she finally agreed. And the core that could imitate the magnetization ability was named after her, the Mystery Moon instrument. In Roland's words, she said, "In this way, even if you abandon me, you'll still remember my name. Also, to make up for my broken heart, can you give me 2 more bottles of chaos drinks?" Then she was dragged away by Lily, who was accompanying her. It took a few days to adjust the magic power core, and it was the same for designing a DC power grid that covered the entire city. Although he only used the most basic knowledge of series and parallel connections, and tried to simplify the calculation by introducing as much dawn power as possible, it still exhausted Roland. During this period, a group of unexpected visitors came to Neverwinter. Rex, together with a dozen members of the Society of Wondrous Crafts, submitted a letter to the King of Greycastle. Roland soon met this group of unconventional explorers from the fjords in the living room. "I thought you wouldn't come." He asked the attendants to serve tea and desserts, and he spoke unhurriedly. It had been more than 3 months since the Fjords people and the Sand Nation people left Neverwinter. If it were not for the piles of relics that were transported to the southernmost region from time to time, he would have almost forgotten about it. At the same time, Roland was also carefully sizing up this group of people. Probably because of the long journey across the sea, they all looked a little haggard. It seemed that in the fjords, only those who could not get on the ship would choose to take another route. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," Rex said apologetically. "It took me too much time to gather the other members of the Society of Wondrous Crafts. Unfortunately, my ability is limited. Although you gave me a book as a proof, many people still have doubts and are unwilling to share their research results. Especially when I mentioned that you invented a machine that can send people into the sky. They think I'm under the same spell as Fan. What about these people? They're all willing to believe you, Your Majesty." Rex bowed and said, "This time, they've all brought their families and are ready to settle in Neverwinter for a long time. They've also completely accepted your conditions." "Very good." Roland took a sip of tea and said, "After you pass the examination of the administrative office, you'll be considered as Greycastle's subjects. After all, joining the Society of Wondrous Crafts was something that the people of the fjords had no choice but to do. There was bound to be a mixture of good and bad people. If they could not understand the value of the knowledge in the book, there was basically no value in recruiting them." "What does the examination mean?" "The established procedures to become an official member of Greycastle is mainly to record your identity information. Don't worry, there's no need to sign a contract or anything like that." The crowd immediately heaved a sigh of relief. It was obvious that although they had brought their families, they were still full of anxiety about the future. Perhaps he should give them more confidence. Roland summoned his personal guard Sean. "Your Majesty, what can I do for you? These people are our new guests. Show them around and let them familiarize themselves with the new king's city of Greycastle." Roland spread out his hands and said, "Especially the Miracle Building. If the new Invention Association is established, it'll also have an office on the top floor like the other schools of the philosopher's study. So, there's no harm in learning about it now." "Yes, Your Majesty." Seeing that everyone was confused and followed Sean away, Roland held back his laughter and whispered to Nightingale, "Follow them and have a look." 2 hours later, Nightingale returned to the office. "How was it?" Roland poured her a cup of chaos drink. "You've already guessed it, haven't you?" She curled her lips and drank the drink in one gulp. "Really, you're just like a kid showing off his toys. Don't worry, I think even if you drive them away, they won't leave." "Don't say that. I just want to give them a little confidence." Nightingale rolled her eyes at him. "Ahem, okay, you're a little bit right. You're quick to admit it." She unceremoniously extended the empty cup to Roland. "Do you want to hear more details?" "Yes," Roland admitted honestly, having learned a lesson from his previous experience. "Then prepare 2 more bottles of chaos drink." As the landmark building of Neverwinter, one could see more than half of the city from the top of the building, including the North Slope mountain mine, which always emitted thick smoke, and the Redwater River, which was filled with all kinds of cement boats. Between the two, trains loaded with raw materials rumbled through the city, and a bit further south, the figures of biplanes would often inadvertently streak across the sky. If it was at night, one could even see the brightly lit factories by the river. The light from the windows was reflected on the river like twinkling stars. The story was exactly as he had imagined. For those who had never seen such a scene, the moment they reached the top of the building, it meant the arrival of a new world. Chapter 1254. That night, when Roland told Anna about it, she laughed for a long time. "If those people knew that most of these things were written by you, I'm afraid their eyes would fall out of their sockets." He played with Anna's hair and said casually, "In this way, they should also be obedient to you." "Finally, the Ministry of Industry can hire more people," Anna said with a smile. "I just don't know how good they are. They can recognize the value of that book. At least they are talented." Roland shrugged. Years ago, he had deceived the chief alchemist to come to Neverwinter with a row of redox formulas. And they are willing to bring their families here under pressure, so they must be very curious. With these 2 conditions, as long as they are given the right opportunity, I think they will become famous. He paused and said, "Of course, before they officially help you, they have to finish learning those basic subjects. You can arrange how to do it. This is also a process of establishing a superior and subordinate relationship." Anna leaned closer to him and rested her head on his chest. "To be honest, I don't know if I can lead them well." "You were the one who proposed to be the Minister of Industry," Roland teased. "Now that you're finally not a general without an army, are you afraid?" She stretched out her hand and a slender black fire quietly appeared on her fingertips. She drew a circle in front of Roland and said, "Do you want to be tied up and tickled by black fire again?" "Ah. I mean, if there's anything you don't understand, you can ask Tilly." Roland looked away. "I heard that all the trainee air knight in the academy are afraid of the Princess Royal's majesty." Anna's eyes lit up. "Yes, I can ask your sister for advice. But..." She hesitated. "I haven't talked to her for a long time, and I heard that since the last expedition, her mood has been..." "Don't worry. It's been so long, she must have adjusted." Roland comforted her. "Maybe she'll be very happy if you go and chat with her. After all, you used to do the exam together." Regarding the possibility of resurrection of ashes, he did not reveal it to anyone other than Tilly. The main reason was that he was worried that they would disregard life and death in the war. "Okay." Anna nodded as if she had made up her mind. "It's settled then." Seeing that the crisis had been resolved, Roland changed the topic. By the way, how's the steam truck project going? The first prototype will take a few more days to complete. The structure is similar to the previous Rubik's Cube car, but the control and power system have been simplified. Although the flexibility has decreased a lot, the reliability has increased a lot. When it came to business, Anna's tone immediately became serious. Besides, using it to carry goods and people is not a problem, provided that the road project you mentioned can be completed smoothly. If it's just an ordinary dirt road or mountain road, it basically can't run. What about the tractor? That's far from it. Anna shook her head. The drawings you gave me are not detailed enough. There are many parts that need to be done in practice. Moreover, the suspension and control system are different from those of wheeled vehicles. I'm afraid it'll take a long time to build a qualified prototype. However, what they lacked the most now was time. If they only relied on defense, the demons would only become more and more difficult to deal with. To get rid of the dependence on land warfare, armored troops were undoubtedly the best choice. However, it was not easy to collect the drawings of such old large-scale machinery. Unlike the ready-made products in textbooks, even in the dream world, he could only find some scattered detailed drawings of the parts. Not to mention that they were not accurate, it was also doubtful whether they could match each other. If they directly used modern parts, Neverwinter's technological level was far from up to standard. Whether it was the tracked tractor or the armored vehicles modified on this basis, they were all consumables. He could not let Anna build all of them. In the end, there were too few people available. When the industry developed to a certain level, any product could involve hundreds of categories, and it would be difficult to rely on one or two people to support the overall situation. This problem would become more and more obvious in the future. For example, Tilly had given him feedback on the shortcomings of the biplane and suggestions for improvement, but he had no time to deal with all of them. If the third Battle of Divine Will came 50 years later, all of these problems could be easily solved. However, the enemies obviously would not give him this opportunity. I'll think of another way, Roland said slowly. Roland, I remember you said that the dream world is getting richer and richer, right? Anna blinked her lake blue eyes as if she had come up with an idea. Yes, it seems to be improving itself. If not, I wouldn't have been able to bring back the following materials. According to Lon, this was a manifestation of the dream world strengthening itself, it was eroding the power of the gods. In that case, why don't you directly seek help from the dream world? You mean, to mobilize more people to search? No, Anna said with a sly smile, I'm thinking of a more direct way. She whispered her idea into Roland's ear, I just don't know if it will work. Roland could not help but be startled. He pondered for a moment, and the more he thought, the more excited he became. This may work. You can try it later. Anna stretched. If it works, we'll all be much more relaxed. But for now, accompany me first. When Roland opened his eyes from the dream world, a complete plan had already emerged in his mind. Anna's idea was actually not complicated. Since Neverwinter lacked enough talents, they might as well recruit from here. After receiving this hint, Roland thought more deeply, he could set up his own design bureau in the dream world. Nominally, he would spend money to have fun. After all, antique and model enthusiasts were everywhere. No matter what he did, he would not attract any attention. In fact, he could provide research and development support and detailed drawings for the real world. He could even carry out follow-up tests and improvements here. Compared to searching for information on the internet like looking for a needle in a haystack, this method was undoubtedly more targeted and much more efficient. However, the threshold for doing this was undoubtedly very high. It was so high that the money he had accumulated from robbing fallen evils was far from enough. Unless he could find a more powerful supporter. And now there seemed to be one. One of the members of the board of directors of the Clover Group, Garcia's father, Guard. Of course, given Guard's personality, it was very likely that he would not achieve the result he wanted. After all, for Guard, even if the cost was not large, he would not give it up so easily. It was difficult for Garcia to help him in this matter, so he needed some other bargaining chips. Chapter 1255. Hello, Mr. Roland. Rock's calm voice came from the other end of the line. I didn't expect you to call me so early. Is there anything urgent? Upon hearing Rock's words, Roland realized that it was only 7:00 in the morning. He felt a little embarrassed and said, sorry, did I wake you up? I'm in some trouble and may need the association's help. It has nothing to do with the fallen evils, but it's really important. It's okay, Rock said calmly. Sleeping for a long time is just a habit of the body. For an awakened at my age, I spend most of the day with my eyes open. If there's any trouble, just tell me. Recently, he had been very active in the eyes of the Martialist Association's higher-ups. Not only was he the most active in dealing with the fallen evils, but he was also one of the best. He was only inferior to the Crusade group led by the two Guardians and the Star team led by Fei Yuhan. More importantly, compared to other martialists, he always acted alone. Such a high efficiency in eliminating the fallen evils had greatly boosted the reputation of the conservative faction and made him as influential as the higher-ups. Of course, this was the result of Roland's best efforts to conceal his achievements. Most of the fallen cores had disintegrated and returned to the dream world. He never hunted fallen evils alone. Every time he took action, he would be followed by a large group of tequila witches. In the face of all kinds of strange abilities, the fallen evils could hardly fight back. In any case, his performance quickly spread among the higher-ups. Now, not only could he freely enter the various facilities of the Martialist Association, but he was also equipped with a phone that allowed him to directly contact the Guardians. Before that, I want to ask you a question. What's the relationship between the Prism City and the Clover Group? Roland remembered that Garcia had told him that her father had participated in the construction of the Prism City. Simply put, it's a long-term cooperative relationship, Rock replied. Of course, we maintain close cooperation with many companies. After all, the operation of the association requires a lot of resources. In other words, we're considered influential clients. You can say so. That's good. Roland quickly explained his needs. There was a rare silence on the other end of the phone. After a while, the other party replied hesitantly, there's no problem with that, but, is it really that important to you? It is the same for this world. Roland tried his best to sound as sincere as possible. Even if Nightingale were to come to the dream world, she would not be able to tell that he was lying. If the humans were to fall into a disadvantageous situation in the battle of divine will, he would not be able to escape either. If that really happened, the time in the dream world would also be frozen, and he would be forever frozen in the realm of mind. All right, I understand. Rock didn't argue any further. No matter what, the association is grateful for your efforts. If you hadn't stepped forward bravely, there wouldn't have been so many young people who decided to stay, and our situation would have been even more difficult. Hearing the Guardian's honest reply, Roland was inexplicably touched. Although his reason for killing the fallen evils was very different from the association's, the Guardian's gratitude was genuine. Perhaps, as Lon had said, for the fallen evils, this world was all there was to them. Roland wanted to say something like, it's nothing, it's what I should do, but he unconsciously said something else instead. I'll protect this place. After hanging up the phone, Roland first saw Zero out. Although she had awakened the force of nature on the day of the erosion of the modern world, she still had to go to school. Moreover, Saint Milan, Dodo, and Ling were all in the same school as Zero, so there was no need to worry about the fallen evils. Roland then went to the Rose Café. Since he had contacted Lon, the café had never officially opened for business. The shutter gate was always closed. Only by entering the café from the side door of the warehouse could one see the other side of the café. No matter what time of day it was, the café was always bustling. For example, at this moment, the witches were preparing their own breakfast. As soon as they opened the door, an alluring barbecue smell wafted into Roland's nose. After enjoying a sumptuous meal and informing them of their free time, Roland drove the van and left the apartment. The headquarters of the Clover Group was in the center of the city, so Roland soon arrived at his destination. Since he had already informed the association beforehand, this time, before he could reveal his identity, someone had already taken him upstairs. The elevator finally stopped on the 100th floor. Roland walked into a spacious office surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass windows. He had a new understanding of the financial resources of the Clover Group. "We meet again, Mr. Roland." Guard took the initiative to shake hands with him. "I didn't expect that in such a short time, you've risen from a newbie martialist to a figure valued by the association's defender. You're really impressive. So polite." Guard had not paid much attention to him when he took out his hunting license. As expected, compared with personal ability, the background of a rich man was more important to a businessman. After exchanging some pleasantries, Roland went straight to the point. "Did the Rock Defender tell you why I'm here?" Guard shook his head. "Mr. Rock only said that you need help from the group and asked us to help you as much as possible. But as you know, with the current size of the Clover Group, I can't make many decisions on my own." Guard probably meant that it was impossible for him to withdraw from the expropriation of the tube-shaped apartment. Even if he agreed, the board of directors would not approve it. Roland could not help but laugh. Guard probably thought that he was here to plead for Garcia. In fact, as long as he did not agree, no one could demolish the building under the protection of a group of witches. In addition, the Guardian's words also gave him a lot of freedom. This way of fully trusting him made him feel even better about the association. "It's not too complicated," Roland said, spreading out his hands. "I want to set up a small manufacturing factory, or a model factory. The main purpose is to design and manufacture some modern mechanical equipment, such as steam cars, old-fashioned tractors, the kind that will bring back memories at a glance. More riveted steam steel, do you understand?" Guard twitched the corner of his mouth and asked, "To make a movie?" "You can think of it that way. But it's different from those props that only look good. It can actually be moved, and there are some special requirements. As far as I know, the market for this kind of thing is pathetically small. I don't plan to sell it. I just want to build one or two for fun. I don't need an assembly line or anything. This way, I can reduce a lot of costs." Guard was speechless for a long time. In his eyes, this was simply a way to lose money. "I didn't know that Mr. Roland had such a hobby," Guard said after a long while. After a while, he said, "In other words, do you want the Clover Group to find such a small factory and hire the relevant designers and workers?" "Ugh, it sounds quite difficult. Putting aside the factory, the designer must at least be an engineer with relevant experience. Even with the power of the group, it is not something that can be achieved in a short period of time. That's about it. It doesn't matter if it takes a little longer. Let me ask my secretary first." Guard returned to his desk and picked up the phone. A quarter of an hour later, the secretary called back. Guard turned to look at Roland and said, "Maybe there's a factory that meets your requirements." "So soon?" Roland was slightly surprised. Chapter 1256. Guard's so-called factory was located in a construction site in the southern suburbs of the city. Since he was traveling with the CEO of the department, Roland did not have to drive his minivan anymore. Instead, he took the opportunity to experience what it felt like to be the boss of a luxurious car. He had to admit that lying in a spacious seat that was softer than a sofa and drinking iced champagne from the refrigerator in the back was really addictive. Of course, it would be even better if the champagne was replaced by Coke. When the car drove off the flat road and onto the bumpy temporary road, the roar of machinery became endless. Trucks and excavators could be seen everywhere. Roland could see the banner, Clover Construction Engineering Company, Limited, hanging on the row after row of prefab houses. Towering piles were as dense as a forest in the distance. Guard probably sensed Roland's curiosity, so he took the initiative to explain, "The group plans to build a modern new energy car city here. Currently, the construction department is responsible for the construction, and when all the facilities are completed, it will be handed over to the manufacturing department. This project has been approved for a long time, and it was only implemented a few months ago. It was no wonder that Garcia had stopped protesting against the forced demolition recently. It seemed that the Clover Group had temporarily shifted its target. What about the factory? It will be demolished, Guard replied. It used to be an agricultural machinery factory. It has gone through several reforms, but in the end, it can't keep up with the needs of the times. Considering that your requirements are special, I can leave a factory for you to use. Although it's not under my management, I've already talked to them, so it's not a big deal to leave it for the time being. Is it still staffed? Compared to the site, Roland was more concerned about the professionals. Almost all of them have left, Guard said with a shrug. Only an old master who is about to retire and a dozen workers are left. They are all family members. When the car city is built, they will probably be transferred to new positions. Well, it sounds a little shabby. Roland could not help but think to himself. Nevertheless, it was better than nothing. Although it was still far from the legendary design bureau that he had expected, it was still a start. When he arrived at his destination, he lowered his expectations again. What he saw was a slightly dilapidated factory with an area of about 500 square meters. The steel plate walls were already showing signs of rust. Walking into the factory, the dust in the corners could almost make footprints. The scattered machine tools weren't much better. It was obvious that no one had taken care of them for a long time. Following Guard up the stairs at the head of the factory and approaching the management room, Roland keenly heard the conversation in the room. Sigh, I don't know when the company will demolish this place. Sitting in the same place every day, my butt is going to rot. There's nothing wrong with being idle. Anyway, I won't get a raise when I'm transferred to a new company. I might even have to work overtime every day. I'd rather sit still. What are you talking about? A rather elderly voice interjected. Young people should be full of energy. Vitality can't be eaten. If I could retire and get my salary now, I promise I'd agree to it without hesitation. By the way, Master Xia, you should retire this time, right? I heard that the boss has tried to persuade you several times. In fact, even if you don't clock in now, I don't think the boss will say anything. I just don't want to leave this place. I've been here for almost 30 years. I should take one more look at this place before it's demolished. Do you want me to take a few photos for you? Brat, can photos be the same as the real thing? Wait, someone's here. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound in the room. When Guard's secretary opened the door, everyone in the room had returned to their original positions. Some were tidying up the documents on the table, and some were sitting in front of the computer, typing away as if they had been busy since the beginning. Jia! Mr. Guard, why are you here? Seeing Guard, everyone was stunned. Obviously, the boss they were talking about was not this member of the board of directors. It was as if a government official had suddenly come to an unknown village. I brought my friend here to visit. Guard looked at the oldest person in the crowd. You're Master Xia, right? I heard that you've been working here for decades. Roland also looked at the man. Judging from his appearance, he was about 60 years old. His hair was sparse around the top of his head, and a pair of huge reading glasses hung over his nose. He was skinny and held a thermos cup in his hand. Apart from his spirited eyes, he looked no different from the old men who came and went in the apartment complex. Perhaps the only thing that Master Xia was able to show off was his long service years. Yes, you're right. Master Xia rubbed the thermos and replied in a flattering tone, it's been 29 years since I joined the factory. Alright, this temperament is also far different from those experts who have unique skills and are indifferent to everyone. Roland's expectations in his heart dropped to the bottom. It seems that I'll have to recruit people on the internet by myself. Thank you for your hard work. Guard smiled. This young friend of mine is interested in the factory. Show him around and tell him about the factory. Okay. Master Xia looked at Roland in surprise. But the factory is going to be, if he likes this place, he can keep the factory. As soon as he said this, Roland noticed that Master Xia's eyes suddenly lit up. How should I address you? Just call me Roland. Okay, Mr. Roland. Please follow me. Master Xia led him to the factory building area. When he was about to introduce the long history of the factory, Roland interrupted him. Compared to that, I'm more interested in what kind of work you've done before. Almost everything. Master Xia laughed. From a bench worker to a workshop supervisor. Later, I was the deputy director for a while. When I was busy, I had to do the work of 3 or 4 people. During the day, I arranged assembly lines, and at night, I taught the young men how to repair machines. I didn't have any free time until I couldn't see clearly. Roland stopped and asked, have you done design before? Well, of course. Although I didn't go to a formal university, I did work night shifts in the factory, so I learned a lot by myself. But a pen and a ruler are no match for a computer. Besides, the company set up a special design department a few years ago, so people don't care about paper drawings anymore. If I want a Caterpillar tractor with different specifications and requirements from the market, can you make it? A tractor? Ha, I know it better than my wife. I'm not bragging, Mr. Roland. If I have a few apprentices, I can make it with my eyes closed. He asked in surprise, if that's the case, why didn't the Clover Group hire you to work in the design department? Alas, they can't do anything without computers nowadays. I heard that all the production lines in the new factory are automated. Mechanical arms and robots take care of most of the work, and the people in the old factory are all engaged in sales and administration. Even if they hire me, I can't do anything. Master Xia's tone revealed a hint of loneliness. However, Roland's opinion of him had changed completely. Ordinary image. Such an employee wouldn't steal the limelight. Honest temperament. Honest team members are easier to manage, aren't they? It's not a problem that they don't know how to use computers. There are so many cheap draftsmen. Good, very good. Roland couldn't help smiling and nodding. Ah. Master Xia was stunned, as if he didn't understand what was good about it. The factory won't be demolished, he said directly. I'll transform this place into a new design bureau, and you'll be my first chief designer. Design, Bureau. Chapter 1257. Mr. Roland, Master Xia asked after shaking hands, what is the purpose of the design bureau? To complete all the concepts I need, Roland said with a smile. For example, I want you to build a brand new tractor. It must be simple, reliable, and easy to manufacture. At the same time, it must have the potential to be modified. There should be a lot of tractors like this on the market. Of course, my requirements are more than that. The above is just the basic framework, Roland said, shaking his head. First of all, except for the engine, we have to produce all the parts ourselves. That will cost a lot, Master Xia said. It doesn't need to be mass-produced, and the price can be comparable to some handmade products. I have a few collector friends who are willing to spend a lot of money to buy them. I see. In addition, the production process can't involve automatic machine tools, Roland looked around. The tools in the factory are very suitable. I need to know the specifications and manufacturing process of each part. In other words, the design bureau not only needs to build it, but also needs to draw all the assembly lines. Seeing Master Xia's hesitant expression, he added, of course, I will recruit some freshmen to assist you. You just need to assign them to work. That's good. If I only rely on pen and paper, I'm afraid it will take me more than half a year to figure it out. The last and most important point, Roland said, making it requires a certain amount of imagination. Master Xia was stunned. What did you say? Let me give you an example. For example, this tractor uses steam power. So, in theory, it needs a large boiler and a cabin to store fuel and water. But, in fact, it doesn't have these parts. You can imagine its power source as a nuclear-powered engine, just like in the movies. Master Xie seemed to be a little stunned. Therefore, when making the prototype, we must minimize the impact of these theoretically necessary but actually non-existent parts so that we can get the most accurate data during the test. Do you understand what I mean? Master Xie thought hard for a while before he carefully replied, do you mean that I should design it as something that doesn't belong to this era? Full marks for this summary. Roland grinned. Are there any technical difficulties? Not in theory, but... He hesitated for a moment. To tell you the truth, even if it's built, I'm afraid it won't have any practical value. That's right. My collector friend doesn't care about those things. Master Xie breathed a sigh of relief. He then asked, Mr. Roland, I wonder how much the chief's salary is. Just double your retirement salary, Roland said with a smile. Back in the car, Guard put down his glass and shrugged. How about it? Are you satisfied? Not bad. I just don't know how to calculate the expenses of the factory. Roland pretended to be polite. Don't mention these details. It's an honor for the Clover Group to be able to help the Martialist Association. Guard waved his hand. I'll talk to them later and settle this matter. From now on, you're their new boss. It was not a big deal to keep a factory that was scheduled to be demolished. As for the fixed assets such as the land and factory, they would still belong to the Clover Group. What the Clover Group needed to pay was nothing more than the salaries of some workers and a few processing machines that were waiting to be scrapped. It was undoubtedly a good deal to earn the favor of the guardian of the Prism Town at such a small price. If Roland wanted to collect all these on his own, he would have to spend at least tens of millions, and he might not even be able to do it. Having said that, Roland did not want to miss any opportunity to take advantage of the Clover Group. Is this really a good idea? I've thought about it. If we want the factory to resume normal operation, we'll have to hire a group of workers. In order to increase their enthusiasm, we'll have to set up a reward and punishment system, which will require a lot of money. Well. Guard thought for a moment. I'll assign a financial officer to you later. If there's any additional expenses, just let her know. But Mr. Roland, I can't ask for too much. You know the Clover Group. It's not up to you to decide. Don't worry. I won't make things difficult for you. Sending a financial officer to Roland was obviously a hedge. At least, it could prevent him from burning money uncontrollably. Roland smiled and raised his glass. Thank you so much for your help. It's nothing. The two glasses clinked against each other. 3 days later, the agricultural machinery factory was officially renamed to the Greycastle Design Bureau. Although it still looked shabby, it was already very busy inside due to the temptation of a promotion and a raise. After settling this matter, Roland suddenly felt the burden on his shoulders lightened. Even his footsteps became lighter when he went to the office the next day. He could not help but feel happy when he thought that he could continue to expand the projects and scale of the Design Bureau of Greycastle and the remaining precious design time. In this way, Anna would not have to work until midnight every day. She could devote more energy to her favorite inventions and creations, which was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Perhaps those employees would never know that their drawings would become reality in another world, where they would fight against alien enemies in a corner of the vast and fertile continent to defend the last continuation and glory of mankind. What are you giggling about, Your Majesty? Nightingale appeared in front of him with a contemptuous look. Did you have a good time last night? You didn't do anything you shouldn't have in your dream, did you? How could I? Do I look like that kind of person? Nightingale curled her lips. Actually, it's normal. I heard from Phyllis that the ancient witches didn't care much about these things. They thought it was no different from eating and sleeping. Did she really say that? No, I lied to you. Nightingale squinted her eyes and leaned over. Were you thinking about that just now? It turned out to be a trap. I can only say that you're thinking too much. Roland glared at her. I'm so happy because I solved a big problem. It's not what you're thinking. Well, I'm 95% honest. I'm telling the truth, Nightingale said, spreading out her hands. You're now accurate to a single digit? Yes, maybe it's because I've been using it a lot. I always feel that it's much more sensitive than before. Then what's with the 5%? I'm telling you in advance, I'm not lying. Maybe it's just your subconscious, Nightingale said as she raised the corner of her mouth. Ah. Roland was speechless. He had a feeling that he would be tricked by Nightingale sooner or later, so he simply stopped talking. By the way, Nightingale said after chewing the dried fish for a while. You haven't been looking at the bloody moon lately. Yeah. Roland realized that he had not looked up at the sky for a long time. The scarlet disk was still hanging high outside the window. No matter when he looked up, it was always in the same position, as if it was still. It's probably because he knows that it's just an empty hole. Just then, the phone on the desk rang. It was from the administrative office. Bhairav? What's up? Roland picked up the phone. Chapter 1258. Roland passed through several tightly guarded doors and entered the inner chamber of the treasury in the castle area. When he was still in Border Town, all the golden dragons were not enough to fill up a few boxes, but the basement of the castle was enough to keep the entire town running. Ever since he started selling the steam engine and other magic products, his income had increased to an astonishing level. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was raking in money every day. As the territory expanded, so did the expenses. To make it easier for the administrative office to access the funds, he ordered people to build a special treasury between the castle and the administrative office. Although it was strictly guarded, as long as the procedures were in line with the regulations, the department heads could enter the treasury to withdraw funds, which caused a heated discussion at that time. After all, almost no noble would take out all their own money to build a territory, let alone allow outsiders to enter and leave. However, at that time, apart from Bhairav, no one else knew that Roland did not take these hard coins seriously at all. It did not matter how many coins there were, as long as they could keep up with the needs of the city's development. For a long time, the income of Neverwinter was greater than the expenditure. It had been a long time since Roland heard the report that the savings were running low. Your Majesty. Bhairav, who had been waiting in the treasury, stepped forward and saluted. Look, we only have the last 12 boxes of golden dragon left. Generally speaking, there were about 2,000 golden dragons in a box, and the total amount was about 20,000. Compared to the past, when the treasury was full, it looked a little empty. As for the silver wolves and copper eagles scattered in the corner, they were piled up like small hills, but they were of little use. How long can it last? Roland asked. Based on the current trend, 2 months at most. That's faster than I thought. He raised his eyebrows. Is it mainly used on the salaries? Yes, it accounts for more than 50% of the expenses. The population is growing too fast, and the expenses of the engineering team and the smelting team are the most obvious. In addition, you need to hire a large number of ships from the Fjord's Chamber of Commerce, which costs about 4,000 to 5,000 golden dragon every month. If you stop this part, the administrative office will be able to hold on until the next sales share of the Joint Chamber of Commerce. You can stop everything, but you can't stop transporting people. Roland interrupted the old butler. Then. Bhairav rubbed his hands. I remember you said in the last meeting that there was a way to solve this once and for all. Is it true? So you haven't forgotten. Roland smiled and looked around the vault. Perhaps it was expected that such a day would come. The vault was quite spacious and clean. After removing the iron railings and the shelves in the room, it was basically no different from an ordinary house. One would not feel depressed even if they stayed for a long time. It was a good place to print money. When is the next payday? 1 week later. Store these golden dragon, don't touch them for the time being. He nodded. Come with me to the office. I have a new department to set up. We'll talk about the specific rules there. Although this day came earlier than expected, he had started to prepare for it more than half a year ago. The token issued to the witch union and sleeping spell was a test. If even the witches could not find a loophole and counterfeit the paper money, the foundation of replacing the metal currency with paper money had been established and could be put into official use at any time. Yes, Your Majesty. Barav seemed to be relieved. It was obvious that he still had a lingering fear of the days when he had no money. Now that he had obtained Roland's approval, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes eased a little. By the way, Your Majesty, what's the name of the new department? Bank, Roland replied. 5 days later, the bulletin board in the central square of Neverwinter was replaced with a full page of new notices, which caused a great stir among the residents. The administrative office once again sent a person to give a speech, which was a rare sight after the universal education. The Grey Castle Weekly also published the details of the notice on the most eye-catching front page. His Majesty will issue new coins to replace the Golden Dragon, Silver Wolf and Bronze Eagle. For a time, the streets and alleys were filled with discussions about the currency reform. Victor's hotel was no exception. He had originally planned to return to the port of Clearwater after watching the magic movie, but the sudden appearance of the bloody moon disrupted all his plans. Panic caused the order to become unstable, so he immediately changed his plan and decided to stay here for a while, not because of his loyalty to the King of Grey Castle, but because he believed that if the bloody moon really represented the end of the world, other places would only be worse. When the disaster came, Neverwinter was probably the safest place on the whole continent. The king and queen appeared to appease the people, and the police and garrison cracked down on crime. The order soon stabilized. As a witness of the phantom mutation, Victor was also called to investigate many times. It could be said that he was more scared than hurt. Just when he was about to get rid of the gentleness of the maids and set off for the south, he received the news of the reform. The announcement of the new policy shocked him even more than the Crimson Moon. Neverwinter was going to abolish the gold coin, the currency that had been used since the birth of the human kingdom. As a businessman, Victor's first reaction when he heard the news was that it was absolutely impossible. He thought it was the crazy words of a drunkard. In the Four Kingdoms and even overseas, as long as there were people, gold was a precious thing. How could it be so easy to abolish it? However, the newspaper bought by the maid, as well as what he had seen and heard outside, all confirmed the authenticity of the news. The first clause of the reform was, Neverwinter will issue new paper money to replace the existing currency. It has the feature of compulsory circulation. When used according to its face value, no one can refuse to accept it. This meant that the king could use a piece of paper to buy all the goods of the merchants who stepped into the territory of Neverwinter. In a sense, it was not a problem to say that it was a robbery. When I came back, I saw some people fleeing the city with their goods, Tinkle said in a low voice while lying on the soft couch. Her tone was a little worried. Roland did not know whether she was worried that the clothes of the Rainbow Stone would be forcefully bought or that he would run away like the others. Victor smiled bitterly. The maid did not know that he was actually closely tied to the King of Grey Castle. Without the seeds provided by Miss Leaf, there would be no Rainbow Stone today. No matter what happened, he could not easily abandon the industry in Neverwinter. Moreover, based on his understanding of Roland Wimbledon, these policies would sooner or later spread to all parts of the kingdom. In addition, the king's business acumen was not inferior to any of the big merchants in the Kingdom of Dawn. The current situation was not so bad that they had to rely on robbing to maintain the situation, so they should not suddenly have this idea. Thinking of this, Victor calmed down and continued to read. The second and third clauses were related to the livelihood of the people. Work in Neverwinter will be paid in the form of paper money. Materials sold in the administrative office and the convenience market, including but not limited to food and shelter, will only be traded in paper money. The fourth clause obviously took into account the issue of the amount of new coins. The administrative office will provide a long-term exchange service between the new and old coins. At any time, residents can exchange their Golden Dragon, Silver Royal, and Bronze Royals for paper money of the same value. They can also exchange the latter for the former. When the new coins are exchanged for the old coins, the administrative office will charge a 5% handling fee. Victor vaguely realized that there seemed to be something more hidden in this clause. The last clause seemed to be specially set up for foreign merchants. Chapter 1259. At the bottom of this clause, there was also a sample declaration form. In addition to the basic information of the merchant, it seemed that the merchant also had to indicate the sales of the goods. Victor read it carefully several times, and suddenly an idea flashed through his mind. I see. His eyes quickly moved between the fourth and fifth clause, and he gradually grasped the purpose of these two rules: taxation. Like most cities, Neverwinter did not exempt businesses from taxes, but in fact, it was not compulsory to pay taxes. He had always paid taxes according to the actual amount, but among merchants, the phenomenon of tax evasion could be said to be common, and people like him were the exception. Those merchants who bought fixed shops would pay a symbolic part of the tax, while those who rented shops or traveled basically did not pay a single cent. Compared with the patrol team that extorted money and took bribes in the past, the stable and relaxed environment in Neverwinter was no different from trade cities such as Valencia and Eagle City, which had zero taxes. In fact, it was even better. It was this condition that allowed the new King's City to develop a prosperous market in a very short period of time. But it seemed that this situation would not last forever. Of course, the merchant could be exempted from the handling fee, but he also had to submit the source of his income. If the administrative office deducted the tax according to this, nobody could say anything. So there was no way to avoid it. Obviously, there was. As long as he did not exchange the new coins for the Golden Dragon, he could directly use the proceeds to buy goods in Neverwinter and sell them elsewhere to make up for the loss. But this was only a compensation. Victor was very familiar with this situation. No one could guarantee that the income and expenditure would be exactly equal. To maintain a business, the new coins would generally be more than the old coins. They could either go to the administrative office to exchange the new coins for the Golden Dragon, or save them for the next use. After a long time, the situation would gradually become like this: many merchants would have a certain amount of paper money in their hands. Since it could indeed be used to buy things and was convenient to carry, merchants would sooner or later exchange it among themselves. At first, they would exchange it for gold royals, but later on, they might even use it to buy goods. This also meant that no matter which choice the merchants made, it would be beneficial to Neverwinter. However, the point was that it was not difficult to achieve this, but it was difficult to take into account the feelings of merchants. In the past, there were countless lords who were banned, but these policies of Neverwinter did not actually harm the interests of merchants. The registration could provide tax revenue for the city, thereby creating a better trade environment. Considering that legal operators often received preferential treatment from the policy, it was generally not too much of a loss. The merchants who had been holding the notes did not feel much different from before. They could still avoid the tax and spread the notes in a disguised way. As long as the goods in Neverwinter could not be replaced, the new coins would gradually occupy the position of the Golden Dragon, even if it was not under the jurisdiction of the King of Greycastle. Victor noticed that, in fact, it wasn't just the last two clauses. The entire new policy exuded a sense of gentleness. Subtle influence was its greatest characteristic. There was no doubt that as long as the King of Greycastle controlled the grain trade in his territory, the new currency would be valuable. Even if there were some political factors, the main reason was the vast market in Neverwinter. There was no doubt that as long as the King of Greycastle controlled the grain trade in his territory, the new coins would definitely have value. Even if there were no lack of policy factors, the main reason was the vast market in Neverwinter. He had thought that it was a pipe dream, but now it seemed that it was not as unbelievable as he had imagined. As long as he controlled it well, King Roland Wimbledon might really be able to do it. Victor could not help but shudder as he thought about it. Replacing the Golden Dragon was just the beginning. Once everyone accepted the new coins, His Majesty would have unlimited wealth. Any business plan would seem worthless compared to it. If the news spread to the Kingdom of Dawn, the great nobles who were proud of being good at business would probably be shocked. The only problem now was whether others could imitate His Majesty's new coins. 2 days later, on the day of payment, Victor immediately asked Tinkle to buy a set of notes from the residents at 1. 5 times the original price. At the first sight of it, the doubts in the jewelry merchant's heart completely disappeared without a trace. These pieces of paper are so beautiful. Tinkle could not help but exclaim as she played with a brand new note. Indeed. Victor had the same feeling. The new coins looked expensive and were very different from the notes he had imagined. They were soft and tough, which was obviously not the effect of ordinary paper. The most special thing was the patterns on them. There were 7 kinds of notes, ranging from 1,000 to 1. The largest one was equivalent to the golden dragon, which could also be seen from its golden patterns. The remaining ones were 500, 100, 50, 20, 10, and 1. His Majesty had replaced the original unit with the new unit of yuan. According to the different denominations, the colors and patterns were also different. For example, the front of the 1,000 note was printed with the heads of the king and queen, which looked very lifelike. The bottom was marked with the words Royal Bank of Greycastle. Although it only occupied a small area, the outline was very clear. Upon closer inspection, one would find that both the handwriting and the portrait were pieced together by countless tiny stripes. These stripes were even thinner than a strand of hair, yet there was no trace of contamination or adhesion between the two. Just this point alone was enough to stop others from thinking of imitating it. Victor looked at the other new coins one by one. The 500 note was printed with the Witch Union, the 100 with the factory and workers, and the rest with the new things in Neverwinter, such as the Miracle Building, the train, and so on. The back was uniformly printed with the coat of arms of Greycastle with a high tower and 2 guns. He could not help but raise the corner of his mouth. Obviously, the patterns on the new coins were carefully designed and repeatedly considered. From the appearance, they were no different from ordinary works of art. Even if they did not have monetary value, some Fjord's collectors would be willing to spend money to collect them. This was indeed a very smart method. Printing such gorgeous notes would undoubtedly increase the cost, but it would also subconsciously increase the people's confidence. If it was just an ordinary piece of paper, it would probably be hard to believe that it could replace the golden dragon. However, if it was a shiny thing, the effect would be much better, even if they were not fundamentally different. Victor put down the notes and let out a long breath. "What's wrong?" Tinkle asked curiously. Chapter 1260. How's the exchange going these days? On the 3rd day after the new currency was issued, Roland held a council meeting in the castle hall to discuss the feedback on the currency reform. As someone who had been through the same thing, he knew very well how difficult it was to break a tradition that had been maintained for thousands of years. Any mistake in the process could lead to an avalanche of problems. If the new currency collapsed, the administrative office, and even the prestige that he had accumulated over a long period of time would be seriously damaged. "Less than expected, Your Majesty," Barav said in a relaxed tone. "The exchange quota for the past 3 days is less than 1,000 golden dragon coins. Considering that the initial period of the new policy is usually the most turbulent, the Treasury should be able to meet the demand after that." In order to prevent a run on the bank, the first batch of notes was equal to the total monthly salary. Even if all the notes were exchanged, it could still last for 2 months. But if that were to happen, it would essentially mean that the plan had already failed. "I think you worry too much," the old director said with a smile while stroking his beard. "Exchanging the new currency for the old currency is equivalent to a loss. Most subjects won't act rashly unless it's absolutely necessary. But we can't assume that the people have accepted the new currency just like that." Sirius Daly, the Minister of Agriculture, said cautiously. "I found that the convenience market recently sold a lot more food, dried goods, and seasonings. The trade increased instead of decreased." Roland was stunned for a moment before he realized what was going on. "So that's how it is." Roland could not help but laugh. The subjects were indeed unwilling to bear the loss of handling fees when the situation was unclear, so they replaced the hazard avoidance items with other necessities. And in the past, food was often used as a general equivalent. As for dried goods and seasonings, they could be stored for a long time and would eventually be needed. A familiar advertising slogan seemed to emerge in his mind: paper for food, no loss, no fraud. What are you waiting for? But this also made Roland feel relieved. It was not realistic to change people's minds in just a few days, but the administrative office would not feel any pressure if they just turned to buying goods. For example, the output of wheat, eggs, and cheese in Neverwinter was enough to meet the needs of the entire western region. 3 months later, the Treasury would receive a new round of sales from the Joint Chamber of Commerce, and by then, the situation would be set. It doesn't matter. Let them buy as much as they like. He instructed Sirius, you have to keep an eye on the market for a while. There can't be any signs of a shortage in the market. As long as they don't reach the personal limit, they can buy whatever they want. The goods in the convenience market were all daily necessities. It could also be seen as a shop controlled and operated by the state, and one needed to have an ID card to purchase it. As long as those businessmen with large amounts of capital were not involved, short selling would basically not happen. Yes, Your Majesty. By the way, how did the other merchants react? Your Majesty, Barav continued, the merchants in Neverwinter are vaguely divided into 2 factions. The peddlers from all over the continent are still in a wait-and-see state. Many shops have announced their closure. Do you want to? He made a gesture of dismissal. If they can't refuse to accept SGD, should they just close their doors? Roland shook his head. The law doesn't apply. The lease of the shop hasn't expired yet, so it's up to them whether they want to open for business or not. What about the other faction? The big chambers of commerce in the fjords didn't react much and continued their business as usual. However, I've received many letters from the fjords merchants asking if they can pay for the steam engine and paddle steamer with SGD. I've given them a positive reply as per your request. The reception room was instantly filled with whispers. Obviously, everyone was quite surprised by the situation. In their eyes, it was a disgrace to Greycastle that the peddlers from their country had lost to the overseas merchants in supporting the king. Roland did not care. It seemed that the people of the sea were indeed more proactive in accepting new things. When the steam engine was first introduced, it was the fjord's native Marjorie who first showed great interest in it and provided the first bucket of gold for the industrial development of Border Town. But, there's also an exception. Barav coughed twice. A clothing store called Rainbow Stone didn't close its business. Instead, it put up a banner saying that it was holding a discount to celebrate the release of the SGD. According to my people, almost the entire long street was filled with residents who went to buy clothes. Roland blinked and then chuckled. Is it the Victor Lothar who came to me and asked to cooperate with Leaf? Should he say that the other party was brave, or did he really comprehend his idea? Very well. He looked at Honey, the Minister of Publicity. Write a special report on this. At times like this, confidence is more important than gold. Understood. Honey nodded. Yes, Your Majesty, confidence is more important than gold, Edith, who had been listening to them, suddenly said. Edith, who had been listening on the side, suddenly said, please beware of those deliberately fabricated rumors. I think they will come soon. What do you mean? Barav frowned. Will there be people who deliberately want to harm the SGD? It's normal. There are people who benefit from the policy, and there are also people who suffer. For example, those merchants who don't want to accept the SGD, or those who simply want to shake His Majesty's foundation. You don't think that the nobles who once caused such a ruckus will really stop after only 2 years, do you? Ah. The old director was speechless. Of course they didn't. Roland knew that they were just temporarily dormant. As soon as he showed weakness, they would show their fangs again. Even if the demons were already at the city gate. Don't worry. Honey and Summer will watch out for me. And me. The mines in the western region will never have too many people. A cold voice rang out in the conference hall. Although they could only hear the voice and not see the person, no one would think that it was a joke. Roland looked around and said, listen, this is just the beginning. After the first few months of stability, the SGD will be promoted to the whole country as soon as possible and completely replace the circulation of the Golden Dragon. This is very important for us to win the battle of divine will. Everyone still needs to work hard. As you wish. The crowd said in unison. Your Majesty. Bhairav agreed and then hesitated. We need to produce so many SGD in a few months. Can we make it in time? The current quantity is just enough to replace the salary, but it doesn't mean that the production is limited. You don't need to worry about that, Roland replied. Although the SGD was just a piece of paper, it was the pinnacle of technology in Neverwinter. Considering the huge number of Golden Dragon silver wolves accumulated over thousands of years, Roland had never considered letting Soroya carry this burden alone. In terms of paper, the SGD had mixed a certain proportion of rubber worm mucus into the paper pulp, which made it more flexible after drying and not easy to tear. The SGD had a denomination number made of tin foil, which would be embedded in the paper in advance. Only Neverwinter had the technology to make the tin as thin as a cicada's wing. The SGD was printed on a brand new roller printing machine. The pigment was provided by Dark Cloud and Broken Sword. The SGD was bright and durable, much better than the plant and mineral dyes of this era. It could last until the next round of SGD. It could be said that the SGD was the best in terms of production efficiency and counterfeiting. The witches only provided the raw materials, and the production could be done by ordinary people, so the SGD would not encounter any bottlenecks when it came to mass production. The smooth distribution of the SGD solved one of Roland's worries. Now that Neverwinter had both the people and the money, the only thing left was to turn these resources into productivity. Next, I plan to add a batch of projects, about 20,000 to 30,000 people, Roland said to the director of the administrative office, which used to be equivalent to the total population of a main city. Bhairav, you can discuss the specific distribution plan with the ministers of the relevant departments. Yes. First, the Ministry of Chemical Industry, Roland looked at Kyle Sichi. Chapter 1261. I need to expand an ammonia plant and a nitrate plant. You should have already prepared for this, right? Roland asked. Previously, the two plants were stuck on catalysts and had to rely on agatha and paper to solve the problem. The output had always been maintained at a moderate level. It was much higher than the original acid production method using saltpeter, but limited by the witch's magic power and population, there was no way to further expand the scale. Since completing the periodic table of elements, the chemistry laboratory immediately focused on establishing samples. With Lucia's element separation, the Ministry of Chemical Industry had now matched the elements on the table with the actual samples. This made some rather rare materials, such as platinum and rhodium, which were commonly used in industrial nitrate production. Perhaps in terms of efficiency, it was not as efficient as agatha and paper, but as long as there were people, it could build as many factories as it wanted. As the saying goes, if quality was not enough, quantity could make up for it. Without the witches, quality and quantity could not be discussed. Yes, Your Majesty, Kyle said slowly. We've already verified the principle and made a small reaction vessel to simulate the synthesis process. As long as there are enough people, we can start construction at any time. I can give you priority to the literate immigrants. Go prepare after the meeting. Roland paused. In addition, I plan to open a new production line for lead-acid batteries. The Minister of Chemical Industry did not show any strange expression. Others might not know what it was, but he had already read all the books on elementary and intermediate chemistry, and all the content was engraved in his mind. Lead-acid batteries were also commonly known as batteries. The materials used were very simple: lead, lead dioxide, and dilute sulfuric acid. It was not difficult for the alchemist workshop, let alone the current Ministry of Chemical Industry. Using electrolyte solution to light a lamp was a classic experiment in high school chemistry. The advantage of batteries was that they could be recharged repeatedly and only needed to be refilled with pure water every once in a while. The difficulty of manufacturing lead and lead dioxide plates was close to zero. They had not been produced before because they had limited uses and were not a priority due to the lack of population. The amount you need is about. Kyle took out a small notebook and recorded. 100 units per month is enough, Roland replied. The battery was mainly used to start the piston engine's cooler. As the most dazzling industrial crown of Neverwinter, it was really unstylish for the ground crew to shake the biplane when it took off. Previously, Neverwinter did not have enough manpower. Now that Neverwinter had received a large number of immigrants, they naturally did not have to worry too much. With more people, they could do whatever they wanted. With such a small amount, the factory will only need to hire a dozen new people to complete it, Kyle said as he stroked his beard. Of course, the manufacturing of the lead plates, shells and other components will require Her Highness Anna's help. If you can provide detailed drawings, the Ministry of Industry has no problem. Anna nodded. In that case, allow me to think about it for a few days before I submit the blueprint. Roland took a sip of tea with satisfaction. After several years of training, the administrative office was now full of talents, and cross-departmental cooperation had become the norm. This allowed him to only mention the beginning of many new projects, and someone else would finish them later. Next is the Ministry of Industry's mission. After the Battle of Tequila, his brain had a lot of things that needed to be improved and supplemented. Now, he could finally let go and start working. The first thing he needed to do was to improve the combat capabilities of the infantry squads. This was the so-called General Machine Gun Project. The Mark I HMG would be replicated with lighter materials and its structure would be optimized so that the gun body and frame could be separated and carried by one person. Bullets would be supplied by either a cartridge or a magazine. In this way, they could immediately launch a counterattack whenever they encountered an enemy. Even if the enemy was a senior demon, as long as they were not ambushed, they could provide suppressive firepower and create opportunities for the anti-demon grenadiers. Since there were no major changes to the structure, the focus of the lightweight project was on the materials. For example, aluminum alloy and plastic-like products made from rubber worm mucus. The production of both was not high, and the demand for biplanes was high, so the production would not be high. But it was better than nothing. Moreover, the Air Knight also needed machine guns, so putting this project on the agenda could be regarded as killing two birds with one stone. In Roland's opinion, even if the First Army fought in the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter, they should still maintain their local superiority and firepower. Only elite squads with special missions such as reconnaissance, cover, and rescue would be equipped with this weapon. In addition, the semi-automatic rifle modified by Van had been transferred to the munitions factory for official production. Currently, they were replacing the bolt rifle at a ratio of 1:5, which meant that 1 out of 5 people would be equipped with a Van, or rifle. In addition to the logistical pressure, the linkage mechanism was exposed, which would reduce the durability of the rifle and cause it to jam easily. However, it could really improve the firepower of the soldiers. The second project was the biplane. After nearly 4 months of high-intensity testing, the first-generation biplane had been finalized and was named Skyfire. It was similar to the Unicorn, and its structure could not be considered complicated. However, if it was really produced and assembled by ordinary workers, the success rate would still be a problem. As for the engine, it could only be manufactured by Anna for the time being. Even so, Roland still planned to gather all the best workers in the industrial area to overcome this difficulty. It had been more than 3 years since the first steam engine factory was built. The blacksmith apprentices had also changed from wielding iron hammers to operating machine tools. Now was the best time to test the level of manufacturing in Neverwinter. In order to curb the mobility of the devil beasts, seizing the sky was the only solution. And the Skyfire was undoubtedly just the beginning. Lastly, it was to deal with the new appearance of the spider monstrous beasts and the shortcomings of the First Army. Roland planned to add a small caliber cannon between the mortars and the longsong cannons to attack and fight against the monstrous beasts. Its size was tentatively set at 75 mm, and it did not need to rely on the Hummingbird to reduce weight and harden the road. It could also be used by the army. Usually, 1 or 2 horses could tow it, and when there were no horses, people could also be used. This kind of infantry cannon did not have any technical difficulties, and it could be started by transferring a portion of the workers from the original cannon factory. However, before that, he had to first complete the trial production and test firing of the prototype. Roland had already discussed this with Anna countless times in private, so he did not need to explain in detail. She understood tacitly with just a few words. Nearly 10 factories would be built at the same time, and 20 to 30,000 people would be invested in the new project. It could be considered the grandest manufacturing project since the establishment of Neverwinter. And with the acceleration of the migration of immigrants, not only would the pace not stop, it would even become more intense. Chapter 1262. On the other side, the Aerial Knight Academy in Greycastle was also bustling with activity. All the training planes had been dragged out of the hangar and lined up at the end of the runway. More than 30 official trainees held their breath and listened attentively to Princess Tilly's lecture. Farther away, those trainees who had not passed the assessment or were newly selected sat around the runway, waiting to watch the new round of flight. From today on, your training will enter a new stage. Tilly stood in front of a group of people who were much taller than her. She raised her head and said, "Think about what you've learned in the past month and tell me loudly." "Pat, you start first." "Lift up, Your Highness." The trainee who was pointed out answered excitedly. "Next." "Hover." "Magic shadow." "Huh." "No." The trainee quickly changed his words. "I mean, anti-dizziness training, Your Highness." "That's strange." Finkin muttered. Princess Tilly's temper seems to be much better than before. "Really?" Heinz also lowered his voice. "You'll be punished if you make a mistake. You've just cleaned the toilet for a month. Have you forgotten?" "I'm not talking about that." Finkin looked at Good. "What do you think?" Good nodded slightly. "I have the same feeling." He had always felt that Princess Tilly seemed to be inexplicably anxious, which probably had something to do with the poor performance of the Aerial Knight Academy. Out of the 200 or so people who had passed the test, only about 30 of them were standing here. It would not have been a big deal if it was just the low passing rate. Airplanes were being sent in one after another, but there were still only 6 usable airplanes in the hangar. The rest had all been damaged during the test. According to instructor Eagle Face, a plane was even more expensive than a ship. Thousands of gold royals were gone just like that, so no one would be in a good mood. However, the situation seemed to have changed recently. Her Highness was still strict, but there was less of that suffocating heaviness between her brows. The number of airplanes they crashed recently had not decreased. "Finkin, it's your turn," someone around reminded him. Finkin hurriedly straightened his back and said, "Discipline." "Your Highness, I've learned discipline." "And duty," cried Heinz. The crowd roared with laughter. "TSK, I've already suggested that we should send these guys into the barracks and educate them for a month or 2. This is what it's like to be a commoner. Just bear with it." Obviously, these words came from the mouths of students selected by the army. After being punished to clean the toilets for a month, their deeds had become a model for the entire academy. However, the other students who were born as commoners would at most join in and make fun of them. Only the First Army would scoff at their behavior and want to immediately escort them to the North Slope mine. Tilly didn't say much. "Next." Good cast aside all distracting thoughts and said seriously, "Passion." Whispers could be heard in the queue again. "You call this learning?" "I'm afraid you can't think of any other words." He had thought that Princess Royal Highness would express her dissatisfaction or ask further questions, but she only looked at him for a moment and then turned to the next student. After everyone had answered, Tilly nodded and said, "You haven't been flying for a long time, but you've learned a lot. Now, integrate them together and use them in the following training, whether it's technique or willpower." "Yes, Your Highness." The students stood up and said. "You'll be divided into 2 groups, with 3 teams on each side. You'll have a simulated fight. The rules are simple. As long as you can keep your opponent within the crosshair for 10 seconds without being shaken off, it'll be a success. In the past, you've only practiced shooting fixed targets on the ground, but this time, you'll experience what a real aerial duel is like. Everyone was instantly excited. Your Highness. A student raised his hand eagerly. Speak. There's no bullet in the gun, right? Fool, Finkin sneered in a low voice. Of course not. Tilly shook her head. To be precise, there's not even a gun. It's just a model mounted on the nose and body of the plane. You don't have to worry about pulling the trigger out of nervousness and shooting your teammates down. Everyone laughed. Besides, shooting in the air is far more complicated than on the ground. It's not guaranteed that you'll hit when you're within the crosshair, so even if there are bullets, you'll probably miss. She shrugged. Any other questions? Sure enough, Princess Royal has changed a little, Good thought to himself. If it were the old Princess Royal, she would not have shown such a relaxed expression. Finkin raised his hand. After getting permission, he glanced at the students of the First Army and said, Your Highness, since it's a confrontation, how do we determine the winner? Even if I bite my opponent so hard that he can't fight back, it doesn't mean that he's willing to admit defeat. Although formal students had never been exposed to aerial combat, they had been taught the basic concepts in class. If an aerial knight wanted to defeat an enemy, it should try its best to aim the nose of the plane at the target. This process was called biting. Although there was a gun in the back seat, the shooting angle was limited, so it was mainly used to assist and restrain the enemy's pursuit. It's up to me to judge. Tilly took the hands of the two girls next to her and said, They're guests I've specially invited. I'll be watching your every move. Don't try to bluff your way through. It's Lady Sylvie. The other one seems to be the manager of the sleeping spell. Good heard the students of the First Army whisper behind him. And the trainee phalanx over there isn't just sitting there, the Princess Royal continued. Do you see the two-colored flag in their hands? Looking down from the air, they're arranged in 6 numbers. After you take off, the green flag means normal, and the red flag means you've been shot down. When you notice that your number turns red, you'll have to retreat from the combat zone and return to the airport. Do you understand? Yes. Good, I'll split up now. Surprisingly, the teams were not arranged in order, but there was a special name list. Finally, Good and Finkin were assigned to the same team, which was numbered 2. This is the first batch of candidates for boarding training. It's up to you to decide who will pilot and who will shoot. After 15 minutes, teams 1 to 3 will take off first. Don't linger over the airport. The last 3 teams will take off in 5 minutes, and then the training will officially begin. Tilly clapped her hands. Show me everything you've learned. Good could not help clenching his fists. He felt his chest throbbing. Did you notice that? Finkin leaned over. Yes, Good replied. The first and second teams were not randomly selected. The first 3 teams were all civilian students, and the last 3 teams were all from the First Army. Her Royal Highness wanted to see which side was stronger. Oh, that's exactly what I wanted. Finkin rubbed his nose. I've endured their mockery for a long time. I admit I made a mistake and was punished, but since I'm an empty knight, I'll have to fight in the sky. Good did not care who won or lost. He only hoped that he could fly a little longer each time, so that he could stay in the joy for a little longer. He looked down at his hands, which were trembling slightly, as if responding to his heart. Just the thought of being able to hold onto the joystick made him feel a surge of warmth throughout his body. I'll pilot the plane. You just focus on shooting. Finkin patted him on the shoulder. You know it's impossible, Good said without hesitation. They looked at each other for a long time. Finally, Finkin said helplessly, Okay, the old rules. There was a simple and effective ruling method popular in Neverwinter. No one knew the exact origin of it. Some people said it was used by the Witch Union, while others said it came from His Majesty. Anyway, it was very effective. Rock, paper, scissors. I won. Good withdrew his hand. Finkin stared at his fist for a long time and then muttered resentfully, "It's just this time. There'll be more training like this in the future." They came to the parking lot of the biplane and boarded the plane according to the serial number. "You guys, come on." Heinz winked at them from the side of the runway. He was not on the list of the first opponents, so he felt that he was the one who encouraged them. The meaning of his winks was self-evident. "Humph, we didn't train for nothing." Finkin pulled down his goggles and gave a thumbs up to the ground crew. The ladder was quickly removed. As the joystick rotated rapidly, the propeller at the nose of the plane began to spin slowly. When the piston was started and the throttle was connected, Good felt that the machine under him had come to life. "The runway is clear. We can take off now." The ground crew saluted. He raised his arm and returned a standard military salute. "Plane number 2, go." Chapter 1263. With a series of roars, the first group of 3 planes left the airport one after another. "Which side do you think will win?" Tilly asked. Should we bet on the chaos drinks?" Sylvie said uncertainly. "No, just a guess," Camilla said with relief. The latter seemed relieved. "Then I guess the second group. They're all selected from the First Army, right?" "That's right." Tilly nodded. "What about you, Camilla?" "It doesn't matter which side you're on, Your Highness." Camilla Derry sighed. "Although this thing is indeed magical, 30 people are equivalent to 10 devil beasts. Even if the number of devil beasts is doubled, it will still have a limited effect on the situation. I'm afraid it's not worth your attention." "It's just for now," Tilly said with a smile. "When I first came to Neverwinter, there were only a few factories on the riverbank. Now, it's almost extended to the port of Shallow. Besides, the devil beasts today haven't changed much since 400 years ago, but these things have changed several times in just half a year. Who knows what will happen in the future?" Camilla was silent for a moment. "I can't argue with you. But I still have to take care of Sleeping Island. I've been here for too long. Sorry, I made you worry." "No, Your Highness, I know," Tilly said frankly. "You should have left Neverwinter after the Northern Expedition, but you stayed because of me." "Thank you, Camilla. I'm fine now." The chief butler looked at her for a few seconds and then nodded slightly. "I understand. But I can't handle Sleeping Island alone. If you have time, you'd better go back and have a look. The witches who stayed behind are looking forward to your return." "They still don't want to come to Neverwinter?" "Yes. Some people are really hurt too deeply." Although it was only a small part, it also meant that the bloody and cruel past had not completely disappeared. Perhaps it would never disappear. "I'll go back after we win the Battle of Divine Will," Tilly said. "What if we can't win the war?" Just then, the second group of planes roared across the runway. Tilly didn't answer. Instead, she smiled and said, "The training has begun. Come on." "Hey, do you think Her Royal Highness can really notice the movements of 6 planes at the same time?" Finkin roared behind him. The airflow flowed along the fuselage, making whistling sounds. If they were facing the sea breeze, the noise would almost fill the entire cabin. If they didn't shout with all their might, they wouldn't be able to hear each other. That is His Highness' business. His Highness has the final say. Good roared back. At this moment, he noticed that 4 of the 6 numbers on the airfield in the distance had turned green, which meant that Team 2 was taking off. Since they couldn't stay in the Academy's airspace, the 3 planes of Team 1 almost unanimously chose to take a detour toward the sea. He could not see the movements of fighter jets 4, 5, and 6, but there was no doubt that their opponents had noticed their route, so they would not immediately follow them. Climbing and accelerating required time, and rashly barging into the advantage zone of the first to fly would put them at a disadvantage. "I feel a little nervous when I think Her Highness is watching me. If she can judge the direction of the crosshair, her line of sight must overlap with mine." Doesn't that mean she's in my arms? The plane plummeted a little. Finkin, who had been interrupted, shouted, "What the hell are you doing? Can't you control it better?" "I'm trying to save you, fool. If Her Highness can see the crosshair, do you think she can see your lips? You'll be lucky to go to the mine. Finkin immediately shut his mouth. Good looked around through the gap between the upper wing and the fuselage. He could only vaguely see a black dot moving near the sea-level antenna in the distance, while the other plane was completely out of sight. Apparently, everyone had chosen to fight separately. Apart from some basic concepts, Her Royal Highness had never taught them how to fight in the air. Everything depended on their own judgment. Perhaps even Her Highness herself didn't know. After all, the aerial night was something that had never existed before, so it was normal for her to start from scratch. Since there was no rule to defend, it was a safe move to choose an open airspace and wait for the opponent to be spotted before making a move. He thought for a moment, then turned around and flew toward the shallow water port. "Hey, where are you going?" "To the west. Go around the factory area." "Go around? Isn't it better to wait for them here?" "But that's just an equal opportunity." Good yelled as he turned around. "Think about it, how will they fly?" He really didn't care about winning or losing, but the winner would obviously have a longer flight time. How else can they fly? When they get higher and faster, they can come to the sea to find us. That's right. Since they didn't know when the second group would be ready, the first group couldn't get an accurate time to attack, so they were more inclined to defend, just like the knight who had chosen the battlefield and was waiting for the opponent to charge. And there was a way for him to seize the best opportunity to attack first. That was when the second group focused all their attention on the plane above the sea. On open ground, it was difficult to escape detection when a group moved over a large area. But the sky was not the same as the ground. In addition to left and right, there was also up and down. If only we can see them, but they can't see us, we can break the balance. Good said aloud. You don't think they must have less practice than us, do you? Aha! I see. Finkin patted him on the shoulder. I thought I was cunning enough. I didn't expect you to be even more cunning than me. But I like it. Let's do it. Cunning. Are you complimenting me or scolding me? Good rolled his eyes, lowered the nose of the plane, and descended toward the sea. The plane's altitude quickly turned into speed, and the plane disappeared under the sea cliff. At the lowest point, the plane's wheels were almost level with the top of the mast of the ship, and such a low flight attracted the attention of the sailors on the ship. When the plane flew over the shallow water port, there were even cheers and whistles on the dock. But the reaction of the immigrants was obviously different. They all stared at the sky with their mouths agape, looking terrified. There was even a slight disturbance in the queue to get off the ship. Don't fly too low. Otherwise, the police will report us and we'll have to clean the toilet for another month. Finkin reminded. Don't worry. This distance should be enough. Good slowly pulled back the control stick, and the plane gradually leaped out of the horizon and flew into the factory area. This area was equivalent to the west of the airport, where smoke rose all year round. It was unlikely that the second team would choose to ascend here. Huh? Tilly, who was watching the sky through the eye of magic, let out a soft cry of surprise. That's escaping. Sylvie also noticed the scene. Probably because they can't sit still, Tilly said with a faint smile. With the help of the eye of magic, she could see the entire sky clearly. The 3 biplanes of the second team had all taken off. Unlike the first team, the students of the First Army did not immediately go to the seaside to find their opponents. Instead, they continued to hover in the north until the third plane was ready and flew south in a row. Although it took them a long time to assemble, the 3 biplanes did not stray too far away from each other. Interesting. Tilly thought to herself. She neither taught the students how to fight, nor did she arrange the airspace and formation for the simulated battle. It could be said that it was their own decision whether to fight separately or in a group. There was no doubt that no matter who won or lost, after today, the flight manual would no longer be blank in terms of combat content. Sure enough, they're not here. After confirming that there was no trace of the opponents, Good immediately stepped on the accelerator to the limit. The plane roared as it climbed high into the sky. It was not until the wind gradually died down that he turned to the southeast. There was no point of reference in the boundless sky. At this time, even if the students of the second team looked over, they would only regard the sesame-sized black dot as a goshawk. The number 2 plane circled around and returned to the Air Knight Academy from the rear. Chapter 1264. Tilly saw that the first flight team had also noticed the approaching opponents. Plane number 1 and plane number 3 spread out in 2 different directions at the same time, seemingly wanting to attack the second team from the flank. The second group was not as orderly as the first group, but they were still aiming for plane 1, which was closest to them. This immediately put the latter in a disadvantageous position, 1 against 3. With the help of her magic eyes, she could clearly see the nervousness on the pilot's face. Since the 2 groups were almost facing each other head-on, as long as the crosshair was firmly locked onto one plane, it was not impossible to trade one plane for one plane. However, the pilot's nervousness affected his movements. After aiming for only 2 or 3 seconds, he stepped on the left pedal and chose to evade. At this time, the distance between the 2 groups was still more than 500 meters, which allowed the second group to adjust their course without any burden, from a head-on attack to a pursuit. In order to get rid of the tail as much as possible, Plane 1 began to perform various maneuvers. Just as Tilly had said at the beginning, the pilot had used all of his life's knowledge. To be able to master the technical requirements of each maneuver in a short period of a month, he must have practiced hard. However, the First Army students were not inferior to him. They were not shaken off by the series of dives and sharp turns, and followed behind the opponent unhurriedly. Coupled with the advantage in numbers, they did not need to keep their noses fixed on the opponent at all times, while the latter had to pay attention to the movements of the 3 planes at the same time. The numerous maneuvers greatly reduced the altitude and speed of Plane 1. Seeing that there was no way to get rid of them, the pilot gritted his teeth, turned around, and flew toward Plane 3, which was still rushing over. At the same time, the second group also found the best opportunity to attack. Plane 6, which had been maintaining a high altitude, suddenly dived and cut diagonally toward the tail of Plane 1 at 7 o'clock. Although the machine gunners saw this and the pilot did his best to save the plane, it was too late for the plane to shake off this round of strafing. 10 seconds passed in the blink of an eye. Tilly nodded in satisfaction. Square 1, raise the red flag. At this time, Plane 3 finally arrived. They were facing Plane 6, which was climbing, and Plane 4 and Plane 5, which were in good condition. The situation seemed to be overwhelmingly unfavorable. That was if Plane 2, which had been at the highest point, was not included. She cast her gaze toward the sky above the academy. I see them. Finkin leaned half of his body out of the seat and shouted, Wait, the number 1 plane seems to have been shot down. Are you sure? The number 1 on Sosnovka military base has turned red, but they haven't left the battlefield yet. That's only because they haven't realized it yet. Good frowned. His teammates had held on for a shorter time than he had expected. What about Plane 3? If I'm not mistaken, that's the black dot coming from afar. Finkin yelled. Buddy, they're in a mess now. It's time to join the battle. Wait a little longer, look behind you. Can you see the sun? He turned around and immediately closed his eyes. Hey, you are indeed the pilot I chose. Now that I'm facing you, I can hardly open my eyes. You were the one who lost the rock-paper-scissors game. Good shook his head helplessly and pressed down on the joystick. In that case, let's go. Yay! Finkin yelled. The roar of the star-shaped engine drowned out the sound of the wind. The entire plane seemed to be trembling in the violent airflow. The feeling of falling against the wind always made Good's blood boil. He was a charging knight. And he was charging through the entire sky. His teammates on plane 3 focused on the second group of planes, which was the slowest, while the other two began to chase plane 3 away. It was not until they dashed out of the golden sunlight and pounced on the third group like thunder that they noticed the presence of their new opponents. Good noticed that if the other two planes had ignored their teammates and focused on shooting down plane 3, they would have succeeded by now. It was this consideration that gave him the best opportunity to shoot. It was too late for the two planes to realize that something was wrong. After quickly flying over plane 4, Good immediately switched his target to the plane marked with the number 5. He had already locked on to the plane marked with the number 5 when he dived. Although it was a trick and did not mean that he could really shoot down plane 4 at that distance, this was the rule set by the Princess Royal. He believed that Her Highness had seen everything. His teammates could be forced to withdraw from the confrontation training at any time, so he had to hurry. The 4 biplanes were entangled with each other. The situation became very tense, especially for plane 5. Good could even see the ferocious expression of the shooter on the other side of the plane. Although his plane had lost its concealment ability, it still had the advantage in speed. After several rounds of competition, Good finally managed to get a long time to aim. Just when he thought it was about time, Finkin reported the result from the back seat. The flag of plane 5 has turned red. Plane 3 was also eliminated almost at the same time. Plane 6 and themselves were the only ones still holding the green flag at the airport. Plane 3 could not get enough time to aim, probably because the two planes of the second group put too much pressure on their teammates. Plane 6 soon appeared behind them after taking a breather. What the hell are those guys doing? They didn't even shoot down one plane. Finkin cursed as he turned the machine gun. Now it's 3 against 1. Who asked us to use them as bait in the first place? Good said casually. Of course, there's another possibility, plane 6 is a tough opponent. His speculation was soon confirmed. No matter which direction he turned, plane 6 followed him closely and did not give him any chance to shake off. He had to move, or plane 6 would definitely get 10 seconds earlier than Finkin. Damn it. His companion's voice was obviously more anxious than before. Can't you fly a little faster? I've tried my best. We'll be killed sooner or later if this goes on. Think of something. How about hiding in the port area? There's a sailboat there for cover. If we hit a refugee boat, whether it's us or not, what do you think will happen to us? We'll probably be shot to death. Finkin's morale immediately dropped. In that case, forget it. At least we won't be the first to be eliminated. Unless there's wind to send us up, I don't think we'll be able to win this round. There's wind. Good was a little startled. An idea flashed through his mind. You're right. I've got an idea. Huh? Do you remember the upwind on the cliff? The sea breeze blowing from the swirling sea to the land was not constant, especially on the side near the coast. Due to the obstruction of the cliff, the airflow would spread along the obstacle, and part of it would become a fast-rising gale. As long as one stood on the edge of the cliff, one could hear the rhythmic whistling from time to time. Finkin's face froze when he realized what Good was referring to. Are you crazy? Let's not talk about whether we can get the upwind or not. If we get too close to the cliff, we'll be doomed if you shake your hand. The area of upwind was very small. Once they left the edge of the cliff, they would immediately be blown away by the sea breeze. Also, affected by the uneven cliff, the direction of the wind was also more complicated. In terms of difficulty, it was more difficult to do so than to shuttle between the sails of a sailboat. I don't have to take that risk. I just need to do it. It's like wasting water. Good quickly lowered his altitude and flew in the direction of the Aerial Knight Academy. Plane number 6 hesitated for a moment before it also began to speed down. How do you know when the strong wind will come? Finkin asked suspiciously. The ships carrying the refugees will tell me. He controlled the biplane to descend and let plane number 6 close the distance between them. After making a big turn, his path overlapped with the coastline, and he gradually approached the ground. In the eyes of other students, this action was no different from admitting defeat. Although plane number 2 was still maintaining a high speed, it had nowhere to run. Their opponents followed closely behind them and firmly bit onto them. A few seconds. Good roared. I guess 8 seconds. 6, 5, 4, Finkin gritted his teeth. During this time, Good kept a part of his attention on a ship sailing to the shallow port not far ahead. However, what he was looking at was not the flag or the sails, but the birds standing on the mast. The flag and the sails were always fluttering, and it was impossible to tell the strength of the wind. Only these seabirds, who had been with the wind for a long time, could capture the strength of the wind. As if sensing something, a flock of seabirds spread their wings, descended from the tall mast, and flew toward the cliff. This scene was very similar to the gliding seagull. He had long observed that the birds seemed to be very interested in this kind of entertainment. From the ship to the cliff, even if their wings did not move, they could still fly with the wind. Just as the flock of birds was about to reach the edge of the cliff, Good suddenly pulled the plane up. Under normal circumstances, this operation would cause the plane to tilt too high, and it would be easy to fall into a stall. However, at this moment, the flock of birds suddenly rose, as if there was an invisible hand holding them up from below. The wind rose. In an instant, Good heard an ear-piercing whistling sound. A gust of wind suddenly appeared and slammed into the wing of the plane. With a violent tremor, plane number 2 accelerated again, and miraculously rushed straight up, and then turned upside down. The whole world was turned upside down. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. He saw the unprepared plane number 6 pass below his head. The pilot raised his head and showed a surprised expression. In the distance, the seabirds were leaping out of the horizon, and their white wings seemed to form a staircase connecting the sky. He did not lie to His Highness. Since the day he entered the academy, his love for flying had increased every day. It was this feeling of flying freely that made him immersed in it, and he could not extricate himself. This was the thing that left the deepest impression on Good among all the things he had learned. Chapter 1265. What an exciting duel, Sylvie could not help but exclaim. Indeed. Tilly curled up the corners of her mouth and glanced at the butler mockingly. Even Camilla, who had been absent-minded all this while, focused her attention at the last moment. Her eyes never strayed from the battle between the two biplanes. When the second biplane took advantage of the wind to shake off its tail, the outcome was already decided. But at this point, winning or losing was no longer important. She saw what she wanted to see. For example, in a one-on-one battle, the side with the advantage in numbers would have a great advantage. They would have more freedom in allocating height and speed until they could force their opponent into a corner. But this number did not simply refer to the sum of the forces invested by both sides. She then deduced that by changing formations and maneuvering, even if the side was at a disadvantage overall, they could still gain the opportunity to outnumber their opponent. If the target was the more agile devil beasts, cooperation would undoubtedly be more important. In addition, she also noticed that the side at a higher altitude had a greater chance of winning. If they could drag the enemy into a dogfight, then the formation cruising in the air could launch an ambush. That might be the best opening. As for how many people to form into a team and how to change their formation during a firefight, that would be the next part of her research. But Tilly also knew that this kind of training was ultimately just for biplanes. If she wanted to confirm the contents of the next part of the flight manual, she would have to go to the actual battlefield to test it out. She was gratified that this batch of students was growing faster than she had expected. At this rate, when the Fire of Heaven was officially produced, Air Knight would be able to test his skills in the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter. Of course, she would not miss this battle of vengeance. The unicorn only existed as a training plane. The new ride that her brother promised should already be in production, right? When the training was over, she might as well go to the castle and remind him to hurry up. At this moment, the last plane landed steadily on the airfield. Both the students and the apprentice phalanxes burst into enthusiastic applause. Now I know why you divided them into two distinct camps, Sylvie sighed softly. Although I did plan to do so, I didn't expect the results to be so good. I thought it would take at least 10 days to half a month to see this scene. Tilly smiled and waved her hand to summon Eagle Face, handing him a new list. Now that everyone is back, let's get ready for the next round. Give me a little more time. She looked to the north. I will soon make the devil pay for his blood. Woo! The drawn-out sound of a horn came from outside the porthole, indicating that there was a meeting up ahead. Ever since he entered the territory of Greycastle, he had heard similar noises more frequently. Manfeld could hear them almost every hour. But now, this interval had been shortened to half an hour, or even less. He had never heard that the Kingdom of Greycastle was a country that was well developed in navigation. In the general impression of the nobles in the Kingdom of Wolfheart, although the Kingdom of Wolfheart was large, it was not rich in resources. It was about the same as the Kingdom of Wolfheart. In terms of richness, the Kingdom of Dawn was the most enviable. But now it seemed that this was not the case. But when he thought about it, it was normal. News could be spread from one village to another, not to mention across two kingdoms. After all, the Kingdom of Dawn had defeated the Church, which was enough to prove that the king was very powerful. But he did not know how long it would take for them to reach the legendary city of Neverwinter. Thinking of this, Manfeld yawned in boredom. The long sea journey was easier than he had imagined. After the ship arrived at the northern port of the Kingdom of Dawn, they did not set off for the next port immediately. Instead, they cleaned up the crowded cabins. Those who were seriously seasick took the land route, and the others were given enough time to rest. The people of the Kingdom of Dawn even built a large number of temporary residences in the dock area, which seemed to be well prepared. They cooperated perfectly with Greycastle. If it were not for the fluttering flag on the wall, Manfeld would have thought that this was the territory of the King of Greycastle. Apparently, the two kingdoms had reached some kind of agreement to transfer them. But Manfeld did not know how much King Roland Wimbledon had to pay for it. Thanks to this move, the bruises on his body healed quickly. In about a week, he was completely healed, and he did not take the magic pills given to him by the two women. I wonder how they are now. Manfeld touched the wrapped meatball in his arms and could not help but think of the two women. Although they were rather haggard and dirty at that time, he could still catch a glimmer of light in their dry hair. If they took care of themselves, they should be fine. He hoped that the two women could arrive safely. He thought that if they could get rid of their status as slaves, they could probably cut off their gloomy past and start a new life. Suddenly, Manfeld heard a strange buzzing sound, as if something was flying over his head. Then he heard messy footsteps coming from the cabin above. It's so noisy, what the hell are those guys doing? Can't they let us sleep? Someone around him immediately complained. Manfeld, however, had an idea. He climbed down from the bed and looked out of the porthole. If he heard it right, those people were walking in the same direction as the buzzing sound. The blue sky and the boundless sea outside were still the same. There seemed to be no change, except that a few big birds were chasing and playing. Wait, what are those birds? Manfeld rubbed his eyes and could not believe what he saw. When the birds flew perpendicular to the sea, their sharp wings and tails did not look like normal creatures at all. When they flew over the ship again, he confirmed that he was not hallucinating because he had been cooped up for too long. Those things were indeed not alive, but seemed to be made of metal. What was more incredible was that he could vaguely see people sitting on them. Manfeld opened his mouth and tried to shout, only to find that he couldn't utter a word. How could this happen? Even though he had gradually accepted the existence of the First Army and the steamships, and had some expectations of the prosperity of Greycastle's King's City, this scene was still far beyond the scope of his understanding. They were both kingdoms, but he had a feeling that Greycastle and the Kingdom of Wolfheart did not belong to the same world. No, not only the Kingdom of Wolfheart, but also the Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Dawn. Otherwise, he would have heard about it before. Since when had the other kingdoms been left so far behind? While Manfeld was lost in his thoughts, the ship blew the horn again, but this time it was much longer, usually to remind the migrants that they were about to dock. Chapter 1266. Line up. Don't push," shouted a man in black uniform from Grey Castle as he shuttled through the crowd. "Look at your number plate and find the corresponding checkpoint after you disembark. Don't go the wrong way." Manfeld, who had not recovered from the shock, was pushed onto the deck by the crowd. He saw a panoramic view of the busy port. It was definitely the largest port he had ever seen. The long dock stretched along the coast, and he could not see the end of it. Different from his previous impression of the damp and decaying port, the ground here was paved with a layer of white bricks, which looked neat and clean. Ships of all sizes came and went. Even the busiest port in the Kingdom of Dawn could not compare with this. This should have been a spectacular sight, as could be seen from the exclamations of the people around him. However, for Manfeld, it was just another unimportant thing in his confused mind. Manfeld looked back at the direction where the ships came from every 3 steps, hoping to see the Iron Bird again. It was almost an instinctive reaction, as if he was looking for evidence and comfort to prove that he was not hallucinating. Unfortunately, when he stepped onto the pier, the unimaginable thing did not appear again. There was a faint sense of loss in his heart. "Please take out your number plate and enter the checkpoint according to the first 3 digits." Many people on the dock shouted with strange metal pipes in their hands. The pipes seemed to have the ability to amplify sound. Their words could be heard clearly even in the noisy crowd. After that, follow the guide's instructions and complete the immigration check. Welcome to the King's City of Grey Castle. Welcome to become one of us. Manfeld shook his head hard, trying to get rid of the distracting thoughts in his mind and focus on what he saw. What a strange welcome. Manfeld could not help but think that the people here all knew that they did not voluntarily move to Grey Castle, and what Grey Castle had done in the Kingdom of Wolfheart was quite forceful. However, Manfeld still felt a little relieved when he heard this. The originally towering rock walls suddenly caved in, forming a natural checkpoint. The densely packed migrants formed a long line and slowly passed through the checkpoint. There were more than 10,000 people gathered at the pier, and it was obvious that the migrants were not only from the Kingdom of Wolfheart. To be able to mobilize so many people in such a short time and project the will of the ruler to the other 3 kingdoms, this was probably the best portrayal of the power of Grey Castle. Suddenly, the team stopped moving. Manfeld heard a commotion behind him. Not only the outsiders, but even the men in black who were maintaining order were surprised. He turned around and saw a huge ship without sails slowly entering the harbor. It had a slender body, and its entire body seemed to be made of metal. There were no visible wheels on either side, and the towering and straight trunk looked incomparably mighty. Such a ship would be the center of attention no matter where it was. However, it was obvious that what truly surprised the people of Grey Castle wasn't the ship itself, but its condition. Are these people crazy? They actually used iron to build a ship. Someone whispered. Don't they know that iron will rust in water? Maybe the King of Grey Castle just wants to show off his wealth. But this iron ship is really impressive. I didn't know that such a heavy thing could float on the water before I saw a stone ship. What's the point of showing off for half a month? I've been to the sea many times and seen all kinds of situations. Salt water is much more corrosive than you can imagine, and ordinary paint can't protect it for long. Look, this is what happens when you act recklessly. Indeed, there were black and brown rust spots all over the body of the steel ship. The surface, which should have been bright and clean, was full of bumps and hollows. The damage was very striking, and it formed a sharp contrast with the white pier. The mast above the ship's head was even broken into several pieces and scattered weakly on the front deck. Coupled with the sluggish movement when it approached the shore, it looked like a sea beast in its twilight years. However, did His Majesty Roland Wimbledon build this ship just to show off? Seeing that the guards in black quickly opened up a path for the sailors on the ship, Manfeld vaguely felt that things were not that simple. The commotion soon subsided, and the queue resumed its flow. When it was his turn, the inspector simply checked his name and number and let him pass. When there were more than 30 people, a man came forward and said, "I'm Matt, a clerk in the administrative office of Neverwinter. I'm in charge of your accommodation for the time being." I believe you must have a lot of questions. Don't worry, I'll explain to you in detail on the way to the residential area. Now, please drink the purifying water on the table. It can cure the demonic plague on you. If not, it's also a cup of sweet drink. Do we have to follow you? Someone questioned. We're now members of Grey Castle, so we can go wherever we want, right? Only after you get your identity cards will you be considered as His Majesty's subjects. Matt shook his head. For an ordinary person, it'll take 1 to 2 years of hard work, and during this period, you must not violate the laws of Grey Castle. However, you're all special talents with special skills. As long as you pass the self-examination, you'll immediately become an official resident of the city. However, the inspector doesn't always have time, and there are many applicants, so you'll have to wait for another 2 or 3 days. Self-examination? Isn't it just an identity examination? You'll know after you experience it yourself. Matt smiled. Compared with your past, the examination focuses more on your present and future. I also passed the same examination to become a clerk in the administrative office. Now, after drinking the water, please follow me, Manfeld thought to himself, this must be the examination that will never lie, mentioned by the coachman. Along the way, Matt did answer many questions that the migrants were most concerned about, such as what kind of jobs they would be able to do in the future, what kind of treatment they would receive, and so on. At least according to the policy announced by the King of Grey Castle, there would be no difference in treatment between the migrants and the natives after they had obtained official identities. Matt even used himself as an example and vividly described his journey from the initial panic to the gradual adaptation, which calmed everyone down a lot. When they entered the temporary residential area in the suburbs, a shrill laughter suddenly caught everyone's attention. Manfeld looked in the direction of the laughter and saw a group of men dressed like refugees surrounding a woman and approaching her. Many people around them noticed this, but none of them stepped forward to stop them. Some people were still incessantly jeering, and some even revealed an eager expression. Damn it, why do I have to encounter such things everywhere I go? He had thought that Neverwinter would be different. Manfeld frowned. Did anyone inform the black-clothed guards? According to Matt's introduction, the black-clothed guards, who were called policemen, had replaced the original patrol team. Manfeld did not know if they were reliable, but he did not have a better idea. However, no one did anything. I advise you to mind your own business, young man. We'll have to stay here for a few days before we move to the inner city. That's right. If we're hated by these scumbags, we'll be the ones to suffer. Manfeld wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally, he looked at Matt and said, I'll go buy some time. Call the security officer here. To his surprise, Matt grabbed his hand and shook his head slightly. Manfeld's heart was filled with disappointment. Chapter 1267. Excuse me, please make way. Manfeld squeezed into the crowd and immediately attracted the attention of the refugees. Who are you? Someone blocked his way, looking displeased. Even if you can't hold it in any longer, you should at least wait until I'm done. He was also the one who laughed sinisterly at the beginning. His mind raced. It seemed that the other party was most likely the leader of this group. It was impossible to take away a woman in front of a dozen gangsters, and he didn't have any weapons. His only chance was to take down the leader first, and then take advantage of the chaos to escape. I'm here to remind you that someone has already informed the guards in black. If you don't run now, it will be too late. Manfeld spread out his hands and pretended to be calm. He took 2 steps closer to the leader and winked at the woman, hoping that she would understand that he was not on the same side as these hooligans. However, the woman did not respond. Instead, she tilted her head and looked confused. Damn it! Doesn't this guy understand the situation he is in? How could he still be so calm even at this stage? What black-clothed guards? Aren't they just patrols? The leader grinned. It's hard to say who they'll help. You are still a rookie, aren't you? Ha ha ha, judging from his appearance, he must be from a rich family. In the end, didn't they end up like us? If you know what's good for you, get out of here before the boss gets angry. The crowd burst into laughter. At this moment, Manfeld made his move. He lowered his shoulder and slammed into the chest of the leader, who had let down his guard. Then, he punched the leader and knocked him to the ground. Compared to Mike McKinley's two well-trained servants, these hooligans were much easier to deal with. From the moment Manfeld made his move to the moment he fell, the leader did not even make a sound. The crowd burst into an uproar. Damn it! You're courting death. Save the boss. Manfeld felt several blows on his back and legs, but he could not care less. He reached out his hand to the woman and said, "Come with me." Something unexpected happened. The woman did extend her hand, but she didn't put it in his palm. Instead, she grabbed his wrist and pulled him into the encirclement. "Hey, you!" Manfeld was about to ask if the woman was mistaken, when he saw the electric sparks bouncing on the woman's body. "Wait a minute, lightning." Before they could come back to their senses, the tiny electric light instantly turned into an electric arc, and the blue light suddenly flourished. Like a long snake, it pounced on the gangsters who rushed up, piercing them one by one like skewers. In front of such an incredible scene, the perpetrator had almost no power to resist. He only had time to let out a short scream before his body stiffened and fell to the ground. "That's enough." The woman clapped her hands and said in a relaxed manner. Are you?" Manfeld was dumbfounded. "That's right, I'm a witch." The woman admitted her identity very calmly. "But, shouldn't all witches be incomparably beautiful, have an impressive figure, and every move of theirs filled with charm?" He looked at the woman carefully for a moment, but the feeling he got from her did not match the description at all. Not to mention her appearance, it was already a compliment that she was ordinary. She was also quite skinny, and from the back, she looked no different from a little girl. "Then, what should we do with them?" Manfeld pointed at the gangsters on the ground. "I'll contact the police department to deal with the aftermath. Don't worry, I only used about 10% of my strength, so they'll be unconscious for half an hour at most. However, the mine and the furnace area won't let them go so easily. I think they'll have to stay there for at least half a month." Manfeld found that he could not follow the woman's words at all. From her tone, it seemed that this conflict was all part of her plan. "By the way, I'm Sharon. Can you tell me your name?" The woman's question interrupted his thoughts. "Well, Manfeld, you're the first person I've met to stand up for me." "Why? Why?" Manfeld rubbed the place where he had been kicked. "Isn't it a matter of course to stop the crime? I just didn't expect that you didn't need my help at all." "A matter of course?" Sharon curled her lips. "If everyone thought that way, those people who started the fight wouldn't have run away. But there's always someone who understands that. In the history books, the nobles were all transformed from such people. They brought order to the chaotic world and paved a way through thorns. You're right. There's always someone who knows what's right and what's wrong." Sharon smiled. "You're a new immigrant to Neverwinter, right? Do you want to join the police department?" "You mean, to become a man in black?" "Yes. The main responsibility of the police is to crack down on crime, maintain order, and protect the residents. I think it's a good job for you. Besides, they don't have to wear black all the time. For example, now." "Huh?" Manfeld was stunned. "Well, I have to report to the administrative office. The receptionist is waiting for you." Sharon waved her hand and walked toward the inner city. "Now you know why I didn't let you go, right?" Matt smiled at Manfeld when he returned to the team. What's going on?" Manfeld asked in confusion. "It's an effective way to deter crime," Matt explained as he walked. Originally, the temporary housing area in the suburbs wasn't this chaotic, at least when I lived there. But since the number of immigrants increased several times, the public security has been severely reduced. Among all the crimes, the violence against vulnerable women is the most prominent. Of course, I'm not saying that you're to blame, because there are many refugees from other places in Grey Castle. Because there are so many of them, it's hard for the police to take care of them all. More importantly, if you don't call the police after the crime has happened, the criminals may have already caused irreparable harm. Isn't it obvious? When a large number of scums are gathered together, even the best place will become a mess, someone muttered. Someone muttered, in my opinion, the King of Grey Castle shouldn't have accepted these unknown people at all. Matt shook his head. His Majesty wants everyone to be useful, especially in the battle of divine will. However, this idea didn't come from His Majesty. It was the witches who suggested it. For them, it can consume magic power, kill time, and maintain public security. It's killing two birds with one stone. Kill time. Manfeld could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth. It's proven that this method is very effective. Any seemingly weak refugee can launch a fatal counterattack, which is enough to dissuade those who are interested in it. Besides, the police will never let go of a criminal, and repeat offenders will think twice about the consequences. After the two parties work together, the public security here is much better than before. I see. Manfeld said thoughtfully. It seemed that the men in black in Neverwinter were completely different from the patrols in the past. Instead, they were more like the knight in Manfeld's mind. If Sharon did not lie to him, this might be an ideal job. After arriving at the temporary housing and being assigned rooms, Matt waved goodbye to them. I'll come back tomorrow and show you the history and characteristics of Neverwinter, which will be very helpful for your future life and integration. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Manfeld was about to ask about the requirements to become a police officer, but he somehow changed his words. On my way here, I saw some giant iron birds. I wonder if you've seen them. Ah, I've seen them. If you stay in Neverwinter for a long time, you'll know that they're not rare. Before Manfeld could finish, Matt replied with a smile, it's indeed a little shocking when you see them for the first time, but you'll get used to it. If you're talented enough, you might even be able to fly them into the sky. Are you serious? Manfeld's heart skipped a beat. Chapter 1268. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. Mr. Sandy Osaka has returned from the swirling sea. And, they seem to be in big trouble. The guard's sudden report made Roland pause for a moment. He had returned to his office after the meeting on expanding the industrial scale, intending to continue perfecting the blueprints that he was going to use next. However, this unexpected news completely interrupted his train of thought. The so-called Sandy Osaka was Thunder's alias. Where is he now? Roland abruptly rose to his feet and asked. He's in the castle hall. He said he wants to see you immediately. Bring him in. Roland ordered. Also, ask the kitchen to prepare an afternoon tea. Yes, I'll do it right away. Sean turned around and quickly disappeared through the door. Should I inform Lightning? Nightingale asked worriedly. Roland shook his head and said, since he can come to the castle, he should be fine. Let's ask him about the situation first. According to the date, Thunder had only been out to sea for a little more than half a year. Including the return journey, it only took him 3 months. Considering that they had stayed on the Shadow Islands for a while, the time spent on the road was even shorter. This was far less than the explorer's original plan. According to the explorer's original plan, this voyage would take at least 1 to 1.5 years. If possible, Thunder even wanted to see what was at the end of the swirling sea and whether the continent he saw in the ruins was in the depths of the sea. It was obvious that some unforeseen event had occurred that caused this expedition that had been prepared for a long time to end halfway. Roland could not help but look out of the window. Could it be related to the bloody moon? Soon, Thunder, who had changed his alias to Sandy, was led into the office by the guard. It was obvious that he was really disheveled this time. He did not even have time to put on his fake beard, and the ostentatious feather decorations were almost gone. If Lightning saw him now, she would probably recognize him. But at the very least, his entire body was still in perfect condition. To Roland, this was enough. Your Majesty, it's nice to see you again. Thunder put his hand on his chest and bowed. I almost thought I would never come back. Roland personally poured him a glass of cold and delicious chaos drink. What happened? Since you've gathered the best navigators of the fjords, I don't think an ordinary storm or tsunami would make you say that. There are signs of storms and tsunamis, but there won't be thousands of sea ghosts. Thunder seemed to still have a lingering fear at this moment. What's more, we will not only encounter sea ghosts, but even more terrifying monsters. Roland felt as if he could feel their despair as he listened to their narration. Countless sea ghosts swarmed the ships, their backs churning as if boiling the seawater, and the slower ships were mercilessly dragged into hell. And among the sea ghosts, there were terrifying ships of flesh and blood. The acid they spat could fall several kilometers away. Just a little bit of it would cause one's skin to split open. Even steel and wood could not resist this kind of corrosion. Even if they sailed at full speed, the expedition team could not widen the distance between the two sides, Sky-Sea Realm. His face was as gloomy as water. Your Majesty, what's that? Thunder asked. It's what the demons call another civilization. Roland slowly told him the information that the demons were fighting on two fronts. The rib-like vault, the body of the ship made of flesh and organs, and the ability to float on the water like a ship and dive into the sea. These features were not much different from what he had seen in the relics of the gods. You mean, we've trespassed into their territory? Maybe. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that the appearance of the bloody moon made them more active and expanded their patrol range. Roland changed the topic. What happened after that? How did the expedition team get out of danger? In fact, it's not that we've shaken them off, but that they've had internal strife, Thunder said with a wry smile. Internal strife? Indeed. The enemies chased us day and night as if they never knew fatigue. By the time we approached the sea line, we had lost more than half of our ships. Most of the sailors who were still alive were on the verge of collapse because they could not rest for a long time. Only the snow wind you built still had energy to spare. After all, she didn't need to adjust the sails and course all the time. Just when everyone was about to lose hope, a larger sea monster suddenly rushed out of the water and entangled one of the sea monsters. It looked like two flesh and blood monsters were biting each other. Although they were both monsters, the former was obviously stronger. The appendages and tentacles that extended from its body quickly tore the latter into pieces. After that, both the sea ghosts and the other sea monsters stopped chasing and surrounded the two as if they were stunned. We took the opportunity to cross the sea line and escape back to the fjords. Roland exhaled a long breath. Fortunately, luck is on your side. It seems that the name of the ship is not in vain. The name of the ship? No, it's nothing. He waved his hand. What's your next plan? Thunder's face showed unprecedented fatigue. To be honest, the loss of the ship is secondary. The expedition has scared most people out of their wits. Now the fjords is filled with a strange atmosphere. The sailors who have been fighting on the sea all their lives now turn pale when they look at the east side of the sea. I guess no one will dare to board the ship to the shadow waters for a long time. Roland was silent. This wasn't surprising at all. Just as he had said, storms and tsunamis could be predicted ahead of time, and brave navigators would always be able to find a way to dance with them. However, this type of experience where one had no ability to resist and could only flee for their lives couldn't even be considered an adventure. The big chambers of commerce also asked me to tell you that they want to buy a piece of land in Grey Castle at a high price as their preparatory shelter. Thunder sighed. After all, no one knows whether they will come back or not. The sea has always been a natural stronghold for the fjords people, but if the enemy can come and go freely in the sea, the whole fjords island is equivalent to an undefended empty city. A year or two ago, he had planned to use the fjords as the last stronghold for the survivors to live the rest of their lives after the defeat, but now the situation was completely reversed. If he had just arrived in Border Town and had less than 300 golden dragons, this kind of deal would have been absolutely desirable. But now, paper money had begun to circulate in the territory, and the so-called high price was no longer an attractive condition. What do you think? I say, if they want to establish a country within a country, they'd better give up as soon as possible. Thunder shrugged and said, you'll never allow them to establish a new island in Greycastle. Roland laughed, thinking that Roland was indeed the most outstanding explorer in the fjords. If they just want to survive, rather than for the privilege accumulated over generations, Greycastle will always welcome them. I'll tell you the truth, Your Majesty. You must be exhausted from the voyage. I've prepared afternoon tea. You can take a hot bath first, and then tell me what you've seen and heard on the way. It'll take several days to repair the snow wind. You can return to the fjords after you've recovered your strength. Thank you, Your Majesty, Thunder said with a hand on his chest. Just as he was about to leave, Roland suddenly stopped him. By the way, about lightning. Are you still going to hide it? Aye. Thunder opened his mouth, but for a moment, he was speechless. You said you'd meet her after this expedition. Although this trip wasn't very successful, now that the Sky Sea realm has occupied more than half of the sea, and the people of the fjords are in a state of panic, you probably won't be able to explore for a long time. Roland held his chin and said, I need people to fight the demons, and Lightning also wants to see her father alive. In that case, how about staying here after the trivial matters are settled?